On the computer screen, a battle is observed between the troops of two opponents. They are grouped into squads and continue their offensive. Each of the opponents is determined. The Knights of the Blue Flag rush forward in the name of the god Nebula, and the orcs who fight under the Red Flag do so for the hegemony. And now they are ready to clash in battle. The gamer dials the required combination, after which the orcs begin their attack. Following them, the defenders of the god Nebula also grab their weapons. They are firing from all guns. However, the enemy easily reflects the cannonballs with the help of magic shields. The gamer suggests that they are able to do this thanks to hegemony. The orcs raise their planes into battle, the pilots of which are ready to bomb the enemy to the last. Using their magic skill, they can summon lightning that burns the enemy alive. At the same time, the pilots continue their attack, leaving not a single patch of enemy land untouched. The player thinks that since the enemy has taken such harsh measures, he should at least take something radical. After thinking it over carefully, he decides to launch an attack with nuclear warheads. And now they are released and rushing into the sky. The orcs notice the launched missiles. However, their leader, smiling, says that he was ready for a nuclear bombardment and sends interceptor missiles towards them. God Nebula says that the enemy is very well prepared for battle. The interceptors encounter nuclear missiles and a massive explosion occurs in the air. However, not all nuclear missiles were overtaken. One continued its flight in the intended direction. She was headed straight to the city center. The Orc King fell to his knees and began to pray, hoping that this would help him save himself and his people. The frightened townspeople follow him and also kneel to pray. However, the rocket flies closer and closer to the castle. King Eugene, without losing hope, continues his prayer. If this were the real world, these prayers would not help anyone. However, it was a lost world, in which faith and prayers always bring results. Alexander thought that, as expected, the opponent used the Holy Oak strategy. The patron of the orcs chuckled and asked if everyone had noticed the new strategy of the Holy Oak in action. He had the second rank of the hegemony server. Now the boy understood why his opponent fought with such confidence. Although the peculiarity of the orc race allows the population of the people to quickly expand, it was still incredible how he managed to gain so much faith so quickly. He simply chose the sky, the largest space, and used special checks. Meanwhile, he was preparing to fight back against technological civilization, and trying to summon the spirit of the apostle was also a good idea. However, all this was obvious. After all, there is a space much larger than the sky. This is what is above it. After the nuclear warhead strike, the enemy decided to launch another strike of mass destruction. The spirit was given the command to stop it. Otherwise, this blow could destroy the entire palace. The god Nebula said that it was impossible to do this because several tungsten rods fell on the spirit. And given the accumulated gravitational acceleration, it was already too late to try to do anything. They could not be stopped, and every single rod pierced the spirit. This attack succeeded in destroying the palace of King Eugene. The impact of the rods left huge craters on the ground. King Eugene was dead, and the underground temple was destroyed along with the palace. The faith that the Orc King had so carefully nurtured would evaporate, and after faith disappears, the apostles will also disappear. In this game, the winner was a player with the nickname Nebula, who at rank 1, he thought that it was a great fight. His opponent did not understand how this happened and demanded a rematch. He was confident that he could win in the next fight. Hegemony continued to persuade Alexander, expecting his consent to a second battle. The guy was wondering if his opponent had something new, since he was so persistently offering a rematch. However, absolutely nothing happened. There were absolutely no updates in the game, and he had already completed the achievements of holding the first rank place. Alexander was about to turn off the computer when he heard the sound of an incoming message. The guy didn't understand who might need him at such a late hour. It was a notification from the game, telling him that he had managed to earn all the game achievements, and the system was thanking him for staying with the last world. He wondered if this could be the end of the game. However, that announcement was followed by another one, which stated that the final world had been in beta testing for a long time, but that the official release of the game was soon to happen, and the player Nebula was allowed to attend a closed screening before the official release. The guy was surprised that it was closed access, and the official release of the game is still ahead. An information window appeared asking if he wanted to start. Since he had received closed access, he of course wanted to try this game too. After agreeing, Alexander found himself in the game under his nickname Nebula. He found himself near a temple, although it could rather be called ruins. Looking around, the main character was afraid that all this might turn out to be a banal dream. However, he heard a voice that made him turn around. It was the girl who said that it was not a dream and he was chosen. She asked permission to greet Alexander, calling him by his real name. He didn't understand how she knew his real name. Besides, what was happening around him mean anyway? He was interested in what these shadows were, and who they were. The girl said that probably some of the players are already familiar with her, and that they hide their faces so that this game is private. And since everyone was interested, she immediately suggested getting down to business. She stopped, stretching her hands up. Alex first thought that he was on Earth, but then he realized that this was not the case, and that this was a world that he had already seen many times. It was a lost world. The girl said that in this huge lost world, Alexander became a real god named Nebula. The guy thought that he had heard absolutely nothing, but he clearly felt the confusion of those around him. He realized that the lost world was not just a game. It was a land abandoned by the gods of old. An incredible civilization once flourished on this planet. Different races lived in harmony with each other. However, for some unknown reason, the gods left this place. Because of this, the time of new gods has come. The girl said that the game was created to find suitable candidates for the role of god of this planet. And Alexander had the opportunity to try to take this place and become a real god. Everything that happens will be like in a game. At first, no one will believe in the guy. But if he can give his people a reason to believe in him, then he will become the only god of this planet. And he will be able to do whatever he wants. All of Alexander's dreams will come true in an instant if he becomes a real god. Alexander was interested in the question of what would happen if he gave up. The girl explained that if he gave in now, he would return to his world and forget everything that had happened to him. However, the guy was interested in what would happen if he gave up after the game had started. But it turned out that after the game started, he would no longer have such an opportunity. Alex wondered what would happen if another god defeated him. In that case, a divine end awaited him. The guy stood in front of the girl and tried to digest the information he had received. He thought that the term divine end meant death, and he asked Ophelia if this meant that they were all risking their lives. However, without waiting for an answer, the guy decided that he had no reason to give up. It's time to make your choice. Ophelia said that if anyone wants to surrender, they should do it right now, and those who decide to continue will begin their journey with a small race. The girl laid out the cards in front of her, after which Alexander realized that everything was really exactly the same as in the game, and this meant that first it would be necessary to choose one of the lower races. However, people were already beginning to give up. They all gave up one after another. The guy assumed that the initial number of people should match the maximum number of players, which was 32, from which he concluded that only 27 people remained. Ophelia interrupted his thoughts by telling him that he could choose first. Alex was confused and didn't understand why he was the first one. The guy walked up to the table and picked up one of the cards lying there. He suggested that perhaps the choice was given based on the rank in the system. When he saw his card, he was very surprised. He could never have expected such a turn of events. In his mind, he went to a very beautiful place where there was a forest and a clean river. A frog was sitting in the water with its head sticking out, and a beautiful butterfly flew past her. However, this was not a simple frog, but a humanoid one. Looking at the butterfly flying past, the frog thought that she had never seen such beautiful butterflies. This butterfly flew to Alexander and landed on his hand. Looking at the butterfly, the guy did not understand why he was thinking about these humanoid frogs. After which he again picked up the card that he had been dealt. It was insects, which have the lowest percentage of wins. But then he thought that a lot depends on how you play, and insects are comparable to birds, and they are quite useful at the very beginning of the journey. However, its point of appearance is on the eastern edge of the continent. This meant that there wouldn't be many battles at the start of the game. Due to the early game enrichment strategy, it will be difficult to use early aggression. In that case, the starting race should have been those who eat insects. For example, humanoid frogs. But Alexander was concerned about the number of tribes. There were about 500 of them, and it was difficult to make the right choice to start the game. In the Lost World, the player's influence on creatures is directly dependent on their level of faith. 10 faith, which he had, was not enough to make these frogs do anything. Alexander wondered what other tribes were nearby, and the idea of humanoid lizards came to his mind. After all, they also ate insects. They are also able to survive without water. The guy noticed that some of them separated from the main group, and this was to his advantage. These were the wounded and the elderly. Then he noticed a very badly injured specimen. Previously, this lizard was in the main group, but he was expelled in a struggle for power. The more he feels that the whole world has abandoned him, the more difficult it will be for him to live. It will be all the easier for him to find God by receiving a small miracle. However, it is such a fragile creature. Having thought about all this, Alexander decided to start with him. The long journey left the humanoid lizards exhausted and hungry, Suddenly, they all looked forward and saw a real gazelle there. They noticed that she was seriously injured, and everyone rushed to catch her. The lizards were very happy to catch her, because they could not remember the last time they saw meat. Someone from the lagging group suggested that the old men and the wounded would not get any meat at all, and the main group, having pounced on the animal, ate it. The meat disappeared very quickly. However, the lizards did not give up, saying that bone marrow was also very nutritious. One of them was already about to try it, but another lizard snatched the bone from his hands. He said that this company had had enough and that at least a little should be left for those who could not hunt. This lizard collected all the bones into a pile and carried them to the lagging group. They were very glad that they were brought at least some food. They all began to gnaw on the bones greedily, absorbing the nutritious bone marrow. The very same badly injured lizard was no exception, and while he was eating, flies were circling around him. The main group approached Jael, asking if he really wanted to do this, but he did not understand their question. They said, "Okay, bring food to the old people or children, but that guy, he's going to die soon because his wound is already rotten." Looking at that guy, Jael thought that he should have died a long time ago. He didn't understand at all how he still managed to stay on his feet. However, many of them only survived because Rak took the brunt of the saber-toothed tiger, and they should appreciate that. But he will die soon anyway, and the living need food. Jael asked how they were all not ashamed to say such things. At night, they all slept in groups or in pairs to keep warm, and only one Rak lay alone. He was tormented by pain and cold. And then that same beautiful butterfly flew up to him. The lizard did not understand what she wanted from him and rose slightly from the ground. She flew as if showing him the way. The others, seeing this, thought that the wounded lizard had finally decided to leave them, and he followed the butterfly. Rak was using his last strength to climb up the rocks, and those who had awakened decided to simply watch him in silence. Following the insect, he thought that it was just his sick fantasy, and in fact there was absolutely no one in front of him, and he was moving nowhere. The lizard was sure that he was the only one who noticed it, but he hoped that maybe it meant something. He followed this butterfly as if it were his dream of a beautiful and long life, so he was ready to climb with all his might. The beautiful butterfly rose higher and higher towards the top of the mountain, and Rak confidently moved after her. Having climbed to the next platform of the mountain, he saw something, but could not make out what it was. Taking a closer look, the lizard realized that the entire mountainside was simply strewn with a huge number of beetles. He realized that this food would be enough not only for him alone, but that this amount of beetles would be enough for the whole group to have a full meal. Alexander received a notification that the humanoid lizards had witnessed a miracle. The protagonist thought that Rak had finally seen a miracle thanks to the intervention of God. Alexander was interested in what actions the wounded lizard would take next. He was very surprised when he decided to tell about this miracle himself. But the guy remembered that creatures with high willpower can make many decisions on their own. While telling about the miracle that had happened, the wounded lizard decided, for greater credibility, to bring one of the beetles in order to show it to the members of his group. The protagonist received a new notification that the Rak tribe had discovered a deity called the Nameless God of Bugs. The guy was outraged that he was called the God of Bugs, and not butterflies. The bug god tried to reassure himself that no one had ever had beautiful names to begin with. Watching the tribe of humanoid lizards, the main character thought that from now on, Rak would be very important to him. But the guy promised that he himself would become important to this lizard. He watched with pleasure the happy pastime of this tribe. Rak saw the same butterfly again and thought that he was having a vision again. The lizard suggested that perhaps he should follow her again. One of the lizards asked Rak if he would go for his vision again, and he replied that winter was already very close, and the beetles appeared from the side from which the cold winds blew, and if they continued to go there, they could freeze to death. Then the lizard suggested ignoring this vision and going in a different direction. But Rak said that this was not a way out either, because these lands were empty, after which he asked himself what the meaning of his visions was. But the lizard did not know the answer, but for now, he could only follow them. The protagonist thought that they had too little faith, but at the very beginning, unfortunately, nothing could be done about it. But he needed much more of this very faith. However, if this lizard continues to believe in the bug god, then a future awaits him that he could not even dream of. Rarak told his tribe members that the nameless bug god had led them to the shelter, and the entire tribe cheered with joy. They were happy that they would be able to survive. Alexander received several notifications at once, which said that his deity level and insect race level had been increased from 1 to 2, and that the insect blessing had become available to him. After which, the main character decided to make Rakrak his priest, so that he would convey his will to his people, and the blessing was supposed to help the humanoid lizard in this. In his dream, a fly flew to him, as if trying to reach the future priest. Rakrak found himself in some place that was incomprehensible to him. He could not understand where he was and what was happening to him. After which, he assumed that this was most likely just his dream. He heard someone calling him, and raising his head, the lizard saw Alexander. He asked him who he was. The main character extended his hand and asked if the lizard would take it, and he asked what this man wanted from him. Alexander gave him his mask, but the lizard returned it to its place and assumed that this was the very same nameless god of beetles. Waking up, Rakrak decided to tell his tribe about what he had dreamed, and they began to express their assumptions about the meaning of this dream. One of his fellow tribesmen suggested that the god of beetles was asking him to sacrifice a buffalo to him. However, in order to catch a buffalo, it was necessary to go far, far into the wasteland, and this was very dangerous. One of the tribe members began to argue with Yahello, saying that the god who brought them to such a good place was asking for this, but the tribe leader continued to insist on his own. He was not ready to risk his fellow tribesmen. Hunting a buffalo is a huge risk to life, and in order to defeat it, the entire tribe must fight, because the buffalo is a very strong animal. If they decided to do this, then there would be no one to look after the old people and children. This was a weighty argument, and the disputant calmed down, because it was impossible to expose the entire tribe to danger. Rakrak said that he would go alone, but Yahello was against it, because he was sure that the lizard would not be able to defeat the buffalo alone. It was simply impossible. And Rakrak said that he was not going there to die. He reported that God had given him a blessing. The whole tribe was surprised to hear this, but the lizard continued, saying that when he woke up in the morning, he saw that all his wounds had healed, and his shoulder was covered with black scales, just like the beetles. The head of the tribe admitted that all this was strange, but he believed that this was no reason to go hunting buffalo alone. Rakrak agreed with this and, showing off his huge muscles, said that they would be the reason. All the lizards were amazed because their fellow tribesmen managed to knock down a huge tree with one blow of a stick. They all ran to him, saying that it was all incredible and asking why he hid such strength from them. They did not believe that it was their Rakrak, because he had just recently died from his wounds. They heard some sound and started asking what it was, and Rakrak asked if they heard it, and pointing his finger to the side said that it was a herd of buffalo. And indeed, in the direction the lizard was pointing, a whole herd of buffalo was running. Yahello thought it was impossible. A herd of buffalo that usually ran along their own specific routes just happened to cross their path. However, Rakrak decided that there was no point in thinking about it, since this was the best time to attack. He rushed at the buffalo, shouting that they must be freed from hunger that day. One of the buffaloes was hit in the forehead with a spear and fell on the spot. The other lizards shouted that they needed to catch the buffalo and rushed into battle. They thought that God was sending them not only beetles but also meat. After the fight, they piled the buffalo bones into a pile and hung the dead buffalo on top of them, pouring its blood over them. Rakrak sat in front of this pile of bones and asked the nameless god of beetles to accept their offering, no matter how pitiful it was. All the others joined him and also began to pray for the acceptance of this offering. They looked at the blood flowing down the buffalo's skull and continued to ask for this offering to be accepted. Alexander thought that no matter how carelessly the ritual was performed, the sincerity of the people who performed it was important, and these lizards were very sincere. Alexander managed to gain even more faith than he expected. For a novice priest, this was a pretty good ritual. And if you also take into account the relatively short period of time in which they managed to cope, then you can say that everything went quite well. Alexander had difficulty attracting the buffalo because he is not the god of the grass that the ungulates eat. To do this, he had to use slightly different methods. The main character couldn't believe that the lizards had eaten even a small baby buffalo. Although at this stage it was foolish to expect them to have knowledge of cattle breeding, it was still too early for that. The tribe of humanoid lizards is small for this oasis. They will be able to hold out in it for a maximum of a few years. At the moment, they know absolutely nothing about crop production and livestock breeding, and surviving this stage will be problematic and very difficult. It is quite difficult to discover some knowledge and skills on your own, but Alexander could not tell them directly, because in that case, he would break the rules of the game. Of course, you can always find a way to convey the necessary information, it just takes some time. Alexander decided to start with one blessing. Waking up from his sleep, Rakrak watched the altar. He had another dream last night. However, he could not interpret his dream. For some reason, the altar was shaking in it. For some reason, the pond that had protected them for many years no longer contained any fish, and the earth dried out so much that nothing could grow on it. His fellow tribesmen, trying to calm the priest, said that nothing like that had happened yet, and there was no point in worrying because God must take care of them. Rakrak said that he also believed in God. However, God's will very often goes hand in hand with difficulties, and if they fail to understand the Boa's intentions, then it will be tantamount to betrayal. This is what the priest was afraid of. He asked Jael to come up to him quickly because he wanted to show him something. Now Rakrak understood why the altar was shaking. Other humanoid lizards were heading in their direction. It was they who drove these lizards out of their tribe. Jael was surprised that they had come to this place, and the priest said that this was to be expected. This huge guy had blue scales, the same as the entire Rakrak tribe used to have. The lizards did not understand why their former tribesmen were riding such a monster. Judging by the number of lizards, the entire tribe was on the move, and this only meant that their homeland, the green swamps, was completely exhausted. Jael suggested that the god had taken all the fertile lands, but the priest said that the lizard could not know this. They were interested in whether the second tribe knew about their shelter, because it is located on a mountain, and until you climb it, you can't see it. In that case, there was a chance that they would simply pass by. But the lizards decided to reveal themselves and shouted that this place belonged to the god of beetles, and lizards with blue scales were not allowed there. Rakrak reassured his fellow tribesmen, saying that perhaps all this was God's plan. Jael asked the priest if he really thought that God had created such a situation in order to test them, and he replied that perhaps it was not a test, but a mission. Perhaps this is a mission to accept and save those who were once their fellow tribesmen. But Jael said that if that guy was capable of anything spiritual, he clearly wouldn't have insisted on driving out all the weak members of the tribe. At that moment, the priest saw the butterfly again. Now he was sure that he was not mistaken and that it was God's will. And then he decided to do everything in his power. Rakrak realized that everything was exactly as the bug god had intended. The Rakrak and Blue Scale tribes had to unite. This was all necessary for the sake of the growth of the number of believers and the development of technological progress. It was strange that the priest made such a decision himself. It seems that his high willpower, which was equal to 14, was involved in this. Rakrak decided that the appearance of the Blue Scale tribe was the work of Alexander. He was partly right, and God sent locusts to the place where the tribe had previously lived and forced them to look for a new refuge. A leader with a high willpower is very good, and if you impose a high level of faith on them, then soon Alexander will practically not have to make any decisions himself. Then the lizards will be able to carry out his orders more effectively. Blue Scale turned to the priest, calling him a noisy fellow and asking if they lived in this place. The lizard didn't like the way he called it, but he confirmed that it was their land. Smiling, the Blue Scale asked what they had there, but they rudely replied that it was none of his business. But then they decided to tell that in their oasis there are trees, fertile land, prey, and the most important thing that is, there is God. This place belongs to the nameless god of beetles. Blue Scale said that the priest's words were incomprehensible to him, and there was no point in talking about it. He wanted to drive away the tribe that believed in God and said that if they left now, he would not attack them. The lizard did not know the number of the enemy, but he was sure that he would not be able to cope with his tribe. He said that since time immemorial, it has been necessary for a leader to be able to count. Rakrak repeated that he did not want to fight and was not at all in the mood for a fight. The priest believed that the unfortunate and the weakened could always find shelter in the arms of God, and then God will take care of them. Blue Scale just laughed at his words. He was not interested in the topic of God at all. He laughed and said that apparently Rakrak still couldn't count. But he replied that this was just the opinion of this lizard, and he did not know God. Blue Scale said that all this was nonsense, then began to attack and shouted for the priest to finally die. Rakrak asked the Lord to grant him courage and strength in order to meet the enemy face to face. The priest stood before the Blue Scales, who wanted to crush him with the huge paws of the monster he was riding on. Thanks to the intertribal battle, the amount of experience points for tribes has increased significantly. The tribe of humanoid lizards was now at Alexander's disposal. This happened thanks to the fact that he paid special attention to it, and he also managed to discover a new skill. Alexander heard Rakrak's requests and decided to help him, as he knew that he still needed this lizard. Blue Scale had already given the command to his pet when he sensed something was wrong. The god of beetles helped the lizard, giving him strength and courage. And Bluescale didn't understand how his opponent managed to dodge, because just recently he was expelled from the tribe because he was too weak. However, he shouted that this would not happen again and rushed into battle again, hoping to defeat Rakrak. Having assessed the characteristics of the Bluescales, Alexander was sure that his protege would be able to cope with this enemy alone. He realized that the whole problem lay in the animal controlled by this lizard. However, thanks to the help of God, he will not have problems with this monster, because the man managed to increase his characteristics and make him the leader of the tribe, and awarded him a new divine avatar, which is called divinity. 1 point of divinity is equal to the maximum possible power of the creature under control, multiplied by 200. Simply put, the total strength of this lizard was now 650, and he easily dealt damage to this monster with his powerful blows. Bluescale didn't understand how this was even possible because the priest threw his animal with ease. The Bluescale lizard men were amazed by Rakrak's strength and skill. This overwhelming difference in power will make absolutely everyone appreciate the strength and power of not only the priest, but also the god who gave them to him. Rising from the ground, Bluescale grabbed his weapon and rushed at his enemy, shouting that he should not be distracted by anything during the fight with him. He said that there are no mistakes in his calculations. However, Rakrak, without listening to his opponent, dealt him his blow. The blow caused the Bluescale's legs to buckle and he fell to the ground. Looking at the enemy tribe, the priest asked who wanted to be next. However, they all threw down their weapons and fell on their knees and swore allegiance to the lizard. Rakrak was incredibly happy that it was all over, but he still couldn't believe that God had just controlled his body. After all that had happened, the tribe returned to their oasis, which they called shelter. The two united tribes spent their time at the altar as if nothing had happened. One of the lizards, who previously belonged to the Bluescale tribe, asked Rakrak, since he was a member of their tribe before his exile, how his scales stopped being blue, and he said that this was the whole point. Thanks to the worship of the god of bugs, they changed a lot and became much stronger. Otherwise, they would not have been able to survive in the wasteland. Jack was surprised and said that the power of this god was immeasurable. Later, in a conversation with the priest, Jael said that the lizard's strength could not be so great, or rather, he could not have imagined such a strong lizard before, after which he asked his comrade if everything was okay, because with the addition of another tribe there were 6 times more of them, and this place could simply begin to run out. Then Rakrak said that they would have to leave, and his interlocutor was surprised by such an answer. He asked if they had to go back to the wasteland again, and then said that they couldn't wander around forever looking for something good. The lizard suggested that the answer might be hidden somewhere in those lands, since the appearance of their ancient brothers had been a divine clue. The blue-scaled monster raged, and the lizards tried to pacify it and said that its master was no more. They didn't understand why this beast couldn't just calm down. The tribe was unable to subdue him, and they knew that at this rate, he would soon break free from his leash and escape. A priest came to the aid of the tribe. He simply brought the hungry beast some food. Having noticed the food, the animal suddenly changed its behavior and began to eat. Rakrak said that if the beast wanted more, he should behave more quietly, after which he brought him some more food. He believed that since God had mercy on this animal and left it alive, it meant that he had some kind of plan for it. Manun showed with his whole appearance that he wanted more food, but the lizard said that if he wanted to be on his side, he would have to learn patience. After these words, the beast obediently lay down on the ground and began to watch what would happen next. When leaving, Rakrak asked his fellow tribesmen to notify him if the Manuns suddenly started to be naughty again. After everything that happened, the lizards spent their time peacefully talking. They looked at the knife and one of them asked the other if he could make something like that, and he replied that if it weren't for that guy's stubbornness, he would have made a better weapon a long time ago. His interlocutor did not see any connection between these, but the lizard explained to him that it was all about the trees. During the creation of the weapon, they burned a large number of trees in order to obtain a special flammable material. Rakrak promised to think about this idea and make a decision the next day. A lizard approached the priest and said that he had heard that Rakrak was looking for a lizard who could accompany him into the wastelands. Rakrak assumed that a wanderer stood before him, and he replied that this was indeed the case. He, a simple body, wandering in search of shelter. As he wandered, he learned to find his way, and he had several ideas about lands that could save them from starvation. However, the lizard could not say for sure whether other wanderers had occupied them. Rakrak was surprised and asked if this meant that other wanderers could have found these lands, and the wanderer replied that this was the case. But the priest was sure that everything would be fine, because if they decided to go against them, then they would simply need to defeat the opponent and take the land for themselves. The wanderer said that if they were determined enough, he could easily trust them. However, the priest asked in response what the wanderer could do to earn Rakrak's trust. The lizard pointed his finger up and said that his answer was there. However, Rakrak and Yahello did not understand what was going on and asked if the answer really lay in the sky. But he again answered in riddle, saying that it was not just in the sky. They continued to guess and suggested that perhaps it was in the stars, and then the wanderer said that it was so. He said that the stars are in motion, and he managed to find his own rules. He said that if you know the paths of the stars, then you can find your way anywhere. The lizards were very interested in this topic, because they knew absolutely nothing about it. The wanderer promised to tell the priest about the star paths, after which he asked if everything came together within a few days, would he be able to earn the priest's trust? And he replied that in that case, of course, he would succeed. The wanderer, pointing to the sky, explained to Rakrak everything he knew about the stars and their movements. After all the explanations, he said goodbye to the priest, and before leaving said that they would see each other at the same time and in the same place. A lizard came running to Rakrak, guarding the Manun, and the priest asked him if the beast had gone berserk again. But he said that Manun was of course a little unhappy. But after they started giving him food on schedule, he became much calmer and softer. Yer said that Yahello had talked about how they needed to find a way to move around the wasteland without the risk of starving. The lizard said that when he saw how the priest managed to calm the Manun with the help of food, an idea came to him. He suggested that this could be done not only with him, but also with other animals. Looking at the buffaloes, he said, for example, with them. Thus, the Rakraka tribe discovered a new skill of cattle breeding. It was believed that at a certain point in human history, two branches appeared. Some began actively cultivating land and growing crops. Others, however, made every effort to devote themselves to cattle breeding. The main character thought that this information was mentioned even in the game he had completed. However, plant growing was considered more stable. It is not for nothing that most civilizations began their development near large bodies of water. But the tribe he chose consists of humanoid lizards, and they are very strong physically and adapted to the environment, and what they need most is cattle breeding. In addition, a title appeared in their tribe that could promote them. It was ore processing, which was started by the lizard from the former blue scale tribe who had rejoined them. With its help, they learned to give metal shape. Of course, it was still softer than good bronze products. But for the Rakraka tribe, which had to fight with stone tools, this was already a big step forward. Watching the tribe, the god of bugs knew that in addition to this, they had acquired another equally important skill. This skill was astronomy, of course. Their knowledge in this area can hardly be called by this term yet, but God was sure that in the distant future they would be able to use it correctly. Observing the starry sky, Rakrak realized that the wanderer was right, and the stars are the guides of the heavens. This meant that all he had to do was put his own plan into action. Having gathered the entire tribe at the altar, he said that quite a lot of time had already passed since the moment when God led them to this oasis, and they even had the chance to meet their brothers, whom they could have abandoned just as they had done in their time, thereby choosing a lonely life. And in that case, they would have been able to live much longer on this earth, but then those whom they abandoned would have died in the endless expanses of the wastelands. But this would be wrong, for God desired salvation, not rejection, because this should be their greatest good. All the assembled lizards listened very attentively to the head of the tribe, and he said that at dawn they would all leave these lands, asking the wanderer to come to him. The priest told everyone that this lizard had been enlightening him for several days about the secrets of traveling on star maps, and Rakrak managed to make sure that he had spoken the truth, after which the lizard said that the wanderer would lead them forward. From that moment, they would trust him in paving their further path. He wanted everyone to know where the wanderer would lead them, and asked him to tell them about it. Pointing to the starry sky, the wanderer began to tell the tribe in great detail about their plans for the route. He said that after the morning sun rose, they would go to the right of the place where it rose, and for 10 whole days they would move forward. Then turning right, they will walk along the rotten river for another 15 moons, and then another 3 days along the mountain rift. After such a long route, they will reach their destination, the endless forest, in which there will be many wild animals and tribes of other creatures. After his story, the chief of the tribe made a conclusion and informed the others about it, saying that this place was ideal for their tribe. Then he thanked the wanderer and told him that he could go. After all this, Rakrak turned menacingly to Ur, asking why they had not eaten any of the buffaloes they had caught yesterday, and he reported that the tribe simply wasn't that hungry. However, the priest did not understand him and said that everyone had worked so hard trying to catch them, but had not received any reward at all in return. Ur agreed that everyone had worked very hard, but he was not really hungry and thought that it would be better to eat this prey at the moment when he felt hungry. Rak liked his answer and praised the lizard for this clever idea. The priest said it was excellent that the lizard wanted to eat the buffalo now, but he held back for the sake of his future. He asked if his fellow tribesmen would continue in the same spirit, to which he replied that he would behave like this until he became hungry. Rak was again pleased with his answer and wished to reward the lizard for such thoughts, and he gave him a new spear with an iron tip instead of a stone one. Ur did not expect such generosity and was very happy with the reward he received. The head of the tribe did not stop there. He said that everyone who followed this lizard and overcame their desire to eat unnecessarily deserved this reward. After the lizards received new spears, they could not hide their emotions. They were incredibly happy. The lizards whispered to each other and said that it was incredible and that they wanted to get something like that too. Jael stood and thought about the fact that he was interested in the plan of the leader of the tribe, but now it seemed he understood what he was thinking. Taking the buffalo skull in his hands, Rak asked everyone to approach him one by one. He put it on his face like a mask and said that the power of God would now come to true warriors. The tribal leader informed them that their journey would only be successful if they were patient and showed the same restraint as they had shown today. Putting on the same mask made of Uru's buffalo skull, he said that from now on his name would be Bone Warrior, after which he said that it was God's will. In this way he called many lizards to him. And then at dawn he announced that the hour had come to leave this divine place, after which he added that everyone should remember that God's will is with them. Therefore, they are not tied to any place. He told everyone to let the nameless bug god into their heads, then said he couldn't promise it would be easy, but they had to move forward fearlessly. The priest promised that for their common good they would overcome this road, just as they had overcome the desire to eat the buffalo. He ordered us to hold on and move forward, having said that the nameless god of beetles would be with them throughout the entire journey. Looking at the sky, he thought that he had arbitrarily expressed God's will and asked the god of bugs to grant him forgiveness for this. The main character, who was watching the lizards at that time, said that the priest should not apologize, because if he had acted differently, he would not have been elected as a priest. He thought that ever since he had managed to achieve the growth of his allies, everything had been going very well, and they had been raising their levels one after another. In addition, Rak's special skills finally showed themselves, and he was able to increase his leadership level by 7 points at once. And he did a great job and lived up to the expectations of the bug god. Rak managed to make a new beginning. Finally, the entire tribe of lizards set out on the road, taking with them the captured herd of buffalo. And they didn't forget about the Manun. However, after walking a short distance, he fell to the ground, and the wanderer assumed that he was very tired. Rak asked if they had time to rest, to which the wanderer replied that they had no other choice, and therefore they would have to make a stop. After his words, the head of the tribe commanded everyone to stop and take a short rest. He wondered if they would find what they were looking for once they reached the end of the mountain ranges, and if he would become stronger if he rested, and then concluded that there was only the unknown ahead, and so he should sit down and rest for a while. Rak thought that he had not eaten anything at all for a long time. He said that the tribe had been walking at this pace for 3 whole days. They were all very tired, and the food they had taken with them was almost gone. All they could do was hope for a miracle from God. One of the lizards ran to the leader and reported that another tribe had appeared ahead. They rushed headlong towards the Rak tribe. This tribe ran to attack the lizards of the Rak tribe, shouting that after this huge monster collapsed, nothing could block their path anymore. But Rak stood in their way and said that they really were crazy, after which he corrected himself and said that perhaps, of course, they were just fools. The tribe of green people did not expect to see opposition from the humanoid lizards. They threw down their weapons in horror, and then they fell on their knees before Rak and began to ask him for forgiveness. They said that there was a misunderstanding, and they just wanted to leave this canyon as quickly as possible. The leader asked again about the misunderstanding, and they replied that they were simply in a hurry. They fled from their homes and thinking about their relatives who had gone into the wastelands. They wanted to eat. Rak asked why they ran away from their own home. He was also interested in what happened in the wastelands. The green man pointed to the side and asked if the lizard could see that hill. after which he said that they used to live there, and although the local lands could hardly be called fertile, it was still enough for their tribe. This was enough for them until that monster appeared. Rakrak asked in surprise what kind of monster he meant. God also became interested in what kind of monster they were talking about, and he saw something huge, with a very large number of paws. He assumed that it was a mortal abomination, an ancient centipede, which had an abomination level of 9. The description of the ancient world says that these creatures were created by the lost gods of the past. However, even after the disappearance of the owners, this abomination remained on Earth. The green man pointed the lizard tribe leader down the cliff. At the foot of the cliff was that very abomination which they called the monster. She had a special skill. These were poisonous fangs. This grace was given to her by a forgotten god. The god of beetles thought that this was too strong an opponent for them for now. The lizards stood and watched the abomination from the side. They did not understand what to do next and where to go. The lizard men of the Rakrak tribe noticed that the earth began to shake. But the green man explained that it was just the monster growling, and one of the lizards asked the leader what they would do. Rakrak asked the wanderer how long it would take them to go around, and he replied that if they decided to return to the wasteland and go around the mountain, it would take about 8 days. The leader understood that 8 days was too much. Alexander noticed that he was hesitating, but he could understand. He did not know what was the best course of action, and his fellow tribesmen were very frightened. Taking a detour would be a wise decision. However, God did not know what decision the tribal leader would make. Yahello decided to take a good look around while the chieftain considered his decision, and he noticed huge stones on the top of the cliff, after which he told the leader that they must fight. After all, they had an advantage now. However, neither Rakrak nor the leader of the Green People tribe could understand what advantage he was talking about. However, he explained that their craftsmen used a method that accelerated the melting of metal, and asked the chief if he remembered how he did it. Rakrak said that the craftsman uses a special tool for this, and the lizard agreed with him. He calls this method air bellows, and the technique requires less effort than any method known to the tribe. Rakrak realized that if they used a special tool, they could achieve greater power with less effort. But the craftsmen experimented for a long time before achieving a good result. But Yahello assured them that they didn't need anything special, and that even the simplest tool would do. They took a big stick and decided to use it to throw stones down from the cliff. The lizards put in a lot of effort to make everything work. We developed a whole strategy for when to push harder and when to let go. They applied force to the count of 1 or 2. God realized that they were rolling the stones to crush the centipede. It was a simple but very good idea. However, in order to kill such a centipede, it was necessary to drop all the stones there on it at once. Unfortunately, Alexander was not sure that this could be accomplished. Yahello shouted that they needed to push faster, and they began to make even greater efforts to accomplish what they had planned. They finally managed to move one of the stones from its place. One of the lizards cried out happily about the stone falling down, and Yahello couldn't believe that it worked. The stones flew down one after another. They flew straight towards the monster that both tribes feared. One of the humanoid lizards asked if they had succeeded. However, they failed to destroy the monster, and it only became more furious. It crawled up the rock and the lizards noticed it. They rushed to throw off the remaining stones as quickly as possible, but Alexander believed that it was too late for this. It was as if the god of beetles had entered the body of the priest, and he began to throw huge stones down. He single-handedly threw them all at the monster crawling towards them. The chief spoke about how the tribe just needed a little help from him. After all, this monster was not going to stand still and continued its upward movement. He decided to jump towards this centipede. The whole tribe was amazed by his actions. Rakrak plunged his iron-tipped spear straight into her head. Then one of the stones hit her right in the face. The limbs of this monster flew in different directions. The leader, who found himself on the ground, watched as the enemy landed on that very ground. The god, who was watching everything that was happening, was glad that the hunt was successful. The defeated monster lay at the foot of the mountain right in front of Rakrak. The tribe managed to destroy the ancient centipede. Faith in the bug god continued to grow, but he received something more important. He wanted to kill this abomination for this very reason. This item was the essence of abomination. Each god has resources needed for a certain minor race. They can be obtained through faith. But to create a completely new thing, special items are used. With this essence, the god will be able to summon the entity. The entity is a generator of faith that spreads the word of God by its very existence. In addition, the entity has the ability to develop, and if it is developed strongly enough, it can receive a special class like an apostle or an avatar. Alexander was interested in whether the creation of an entity in this world was the same as in the game or whether it was different in some way. He thought about what he should create. The lizards gathered around the centipede and discussed whether they could eat its meat. Jael tried it and said it was a bit stinky, but it didn't taste too bad. However, after smelling it again, he said that it would be difficult to eat it like that. Jael suggested that since raw meat wasn't suitable, perhaps it would be worth diluting the flavor with something else. For example, adding an edible part of the vine and cooking the meat over a fire will help them to mask the smell. After this idea came to her mind, she started cooking. She brought the resulting dish to Rak to try, and he said that it became soft and tasty. Then Jael decided to tell him that he tried to cook it over a fire. Just add some edible greens and fry it. Rak said that the smell of this meat was so unpleasant that he already wanted to throw it all away, after which he asked his friend to teach him a useful cooking skill. The girl said that she noticed that there was an heir in the orc tribe, and Rak confirmed her words, saying that everything was correct. Then she said that soon he too would need an heir. After all, sooner or later the leader would grow old, and this was also necessary for stability in the tribe. Rak asked if she thought he needed to find a partner, and she asked a counter question, saying that if he doesn't see anyone else in this role, then what about her? He didn't know what to answer and changed the subject by saying that there was something shiny behind Jael. Rak assumed it was inside the stone on the monster's back. One of the lizards tried it with his teeth and said that he could not eat it, and the wanderer explained that it was metal and it was called gold. Jael said that he had seen it before when the craftsman showed him many different metals. If you clean it well, it will reflect light and shine beautifully, and it also does not change color over time and does not bend, which is probably why it is valued more than other metals. One of the lizards was indignant because they did not care about all these qualities, and it was soft and heavy. Then the wanderer asked him if he wanted to hunt deer. This animal has hooves and long horns, and its meat is sweet and very tasty. Just recently, the orcs told the wanderer where it is fashionable to hunt them. The lizard wanted to go there right away and asked the chieftain if he wanted to join them, but Rak refused. He thought about how this metal doesn't rot. Everything dies and decomposes. Nothing in this world remains unchanged, but this tablet will never rot. Whoever made it tried to save something on it. He was interested in what it could be. The chief's thoughts were interrupted by Jael, who reported that the tribe was ready for sleep. Rak said that he didn't tell anyone where he was going, and it's very good that this lizard always manages to find him. Jael replied that she always managed to do this because Rak was the only lizard that wore a fur cape. The chief was surprised, saying that it was she who told him to wear it, and he said that since he was the chief of the tribe, she just wanted to make him special. She believed that the tribal leader should have some kind of symbol. Rak saw some glowing symbols above the carcass of a dead deer and wondered what it was. He didn't even understand whether it was happening in reality or whether it was his fantasy. The movements of the beetles recreated the symbols that were on the gold. He sat for a long time and tried to figure out the meaning of everything that had happened. At dawn, Jael heard through her sleep that someone was calling her. Opening her eyes, she saw the leader and asked what was the matter. Was there really any problem? And he told her that he wanted to show her something. They went together to the place where the chief had sat all night. Rak drew a symbol in the sand and said that it meant a male lizard, but the girl did not understand it and asked him to explain it to her. Drawing another sign, he said it was the sign of the lizard woman. By drawing an equal sign between them, he said that this meant that they were becoming partners. Smiling, he said that this was his answer to her proposal. The chief took the girl by the hand, and they sat together for a long time. Thanks to these actions of Rak, they managed to invent writing. It would take several more generations for a stable writing system to be created, but Alexander was glad that it had happened at the very beginning. Now it's time to get the festival going. To the uninitiated, it might seem like a completely ordinary hunt. However, the competition to catch the largest game for their partner is the way the humanoid lizards celebrate their wedding. The chief managed to bring down a whole deer, but it looks like they both successfully completed their task. The orc leader asked if Rak and his tribe were really okay with the orcs staying to live on this land, to which they received the answer that they could continue to live as they had lived before, because sooner or later the humanoid lizards would have to face this monster anyway. The orc was very grateful and bowed before Rak. He introduced his son to the priest and said that he was the future leader of their tribe. The orc said that their tribe was more familiar with this area, so his son could lead them further. Rak liked this idea. Orcs used to live in the forests until they were driven out by large beasts and other tribes. But thanks to the humanoid lizards, they managed to return to their usual way of life. The orcs said that they could never forget the kindness of the Rak tribe. The chief noticed some trace on the ground. He asked the wanderer if he knew what it was. He replied that most likely these were frogs that walked on two legs, also called humanoid frogs. Rak had never heard of such a thing before and was very interested in this information. The wanderer continued his story, saying that among them there are both peaceful and warlike species. They speak and think the same way as humanoid lizards. Since they went out on reconnaissance, it means that they are fighting with someone. Judging by the tracks, there was not just one, but at least 5 representatives of this species. The wanderer assumed that their tribe was much larger than the Rak tribe. After all these stories, Rak, having thought about it, ordered to return to the temporary camp. By evening, they had lit torches in their temporary shelter. Jael watched as Rak ordered the tents to be pitched further away and take up as much space as possible. The girl didn't understand why they were doing this, but he explained, saying that apparently the other tribes were much larger than them. She suggested sending more scouts to the borders, and he agreed with her, but ordered them to make sure that everyone had an equal share of the work. The other tribes must certainly have been watching them. A few days later, they changed their location. Fortunately, not a single collision with frogs occurred. While they had managed to strengthen the tribe's security well during this time, Alexander doubted that other players had managed to achieve the same progress as he had. Cattle breeding developed quite well. The tribe also managed to adapt their houses to their new habitat. They managed to spread literacy within the tribe with surprising speed. The symbols on the stone were visible to all the lizards, and the simple map had markings of hunting grounds carved into it. Rak also began recording the amount of crops each lizard collected. Now everyone could see and evaluate their results and the results of others, which increased their productivity. God, who was watching all this, thought that this was an excellent development. Swarms of locusts. In the center of the continent, the number of insects is gradually growing, and in the north, too, the number has increased. The insect race had reached level 4. If there were other players around Alexander, he wouldn't even be able to dream about it. But since he had been summoned from the eastern lands, perhaps it was time to take another advantage of the current circumstances. Both Rak's abilities and the tribe's development have already reached average levels. But that was just the beginning. Further on, dangers awaited them that they had not yet encountered. One of the lizards informed the chief that they had problems. The frogs were heading in their direction. Rak met representatives of the frog tribe. Seeing them, he thought, this is what these humanoid frogs are like. Among them, he noticed one lizard. The chief did not understand what this lizard was doing among the frogs. He assumed that perhaps they wanted to negotiate. One of the frogs introduced himself, saying that his name was Shunan, and that he was the son of the great chief Alroy. He said that they were not going to attack the tribe of humanoid lizards. Rak thought that Shunan was polite in his own way. He introduced himself and said that he was the chief of this tribe, then continued by saying that his tribe also did not wish to fight, but he was interested in why the frogs had honored them with their visit. Shunan replied that they had come to report that the Rak tribe had settled in their territory. The chief did not think that all this land belonged to the frogs, because when his tribe arrived at this place, they did not see any markings indicating the boundaries of the frogs' territory. Of course, he admitted that they had not tried to look for them. He wanted to apologize for such a misunderstanding, but he asked them to understand, saying that such rules were different from those in their homeland, which was in very distant lands. So he asked the frogs to let them stay until they found a more suitable place. Rak turned to Shunan with this request, saying that he was the son of a great leader, and of all those present, only he could help resolve this request. The frog agreed with this, saying that with his authority as the future leader, this was quite possible. Rak thought that he was right, and the chief had sent this delegation to take a closer look at his tribe. Naturally, the lizard had many questions for them, but he needed to be careful and unobtrusively find out as much necessary information as possible. He said that the place where they were was not the most suitable for such serious conversations, and invited the guests to go to their village, where he promised to meet them with all hospitality. Since both tribes agreed to peace without any strife, this should be noted. However, Shunan did not think this was the best idea. He thanked the chief for the invitation and said that he could not accept it since their tribes were not yet so closely acquainted. But Rak said he could not simply let go of those to whom his people were indebted, after which he suggested celebrating this matter right at the place of their negotiations, with which Shunan agreed. The chief ordered meat to be cooked on the fire for their guests. While the food was being prepared, they sat and talked about various topics. Now Rak needed to understand what kind of relationship connected that lizard and the frogs, and why they actually came to his tribe. However, he could not show them directly that these questions interested him. If they understood what he was thinking, they would use it against his people. The chief asked what those large feathers were around the frog's neck. He said that these were cockatrice feathers. Rakrak didn't know who he was and asked Shunan again. The frog said that the chief was lucky that he had not yet met them. They were huge, dangerous birds that stood on two legs and lived in the surrounding forest. Not only are they large, but they are also poisonous and very difficult to catch. And in addition to their speed, they are also known for their agility. It is because of them that the frog tribe has to keep an eye on this area. The chieftain asked if, since they are so difficult to catch, the frogs attack them from a distance by throwing a spear. The frog asked in surprise what a spear was. Rakrak didn't have time to answer him, as he decided to show him his weapon and asked him to bring a bow and arrows. The leader didn't know what it was, and he was very curious. Shunan turned to the lizard who had come with him and asked him to bring his weapon if he was not busy. After he had brought everything, the frog asked him for one more favor. The frog asked him to hang up a target so that he could practice shooting. After Shunan demonstrated his shot, the chief expressed his surprise at the accuracy of the hit, and he said that they have been learning to shoot since childhood, and he is the best student of their tribe. After which Rakrak asked permission to try shooting a bow. The frog willingly gave him his weapon, and the chief thanked him for it. Shunan said the process may seem daunting at first. Rakrak assessed the structure of this weapon to himself and thought that the thread and the stick were very strong. The damage and area of effect were less than that of a spear, but you could carry a lot of arrows with you. In addition, arrows fly more accurately than spears and can be shot much more often. He would have liked to delve much deeper into this skill, but he had never hit the target and was already out of arrows. The frog said that nothing ever works out perfectly the first time and told Owen to collect the arrows. Rakrak said that he was the one who shot, so he should have collected the arrows, but Shunan said that he could consider this as his gesture of goodwill. But there was something more important than shooting that the leader needed to learn. He approached a lizard from another tribe under the pretext of helping and asked if his name was Owen. The chief noticed that the lizard had panicked and asked him how he ended up among the humanoid frogs, but he hesitated in response. But then he said that they live in the same tribe. Rakrak asked why this happened, and the lizard replied that it was all because the two races could help each other. The leader did not understand what this help consisted of, and Owen grinned and suggested that they continue to live in harmony. However, Rakrak continued his interrogation and asked how they could help each other. Owen said that in exchange for protection, the lizards can help the frogs in other ways. Frogs cannot leave the water for long, and lizards are good at collecting fruits and climbing trees. Sharing food with them for protection is not a bad idea. The chief said that they were able to stand up for themselves and that his tribe did not need protection, but the interlocutor continued to insist on his own, saying that the forest was a very dangerous place, and Alroy's tribe was the largest in this forest. The lizard was sure that without these frogs he would not have been able to survive until this moment. Rakrak asked his interlocutor to forget about their conversation and pretend that he was asking about how to shoot a bow correctly. While the lizards and frogs were talking, the meat had already cooked. Shunan really liked the meat and said that he had already gotten used to deer meat, but various additives only made it tastier. The chief was glad that his dish was to the taste of a representative of another tribe. Rakrak asked Shunan if he had ever tasted buffalo meat, and he said he had, but they had stopped catching buffalo a long time ago. The chief said that they kept live buffalo in their tribe, and he offered to exchange one of them for a pair of bows. The frog was ready to do this for a whole live buffalo, but noticing that someone was approaching him, he said that it was unlikely that this would be possible to do. Surprised, Rakrak said he was very sorry. Shunan promised that they could return to this conversation after they got to know each other better. He was glad that the other members of his tribe had already gotten along with the lizards. Not only Owen was able to integrate into the society of the Rakraka tribe, but also the warriors of the frog tribe. But this was not surprising, because two different species coexisted in it. Shunan asked Owen to tell how they had helped each other within the tribe over the past 2 months. He replied by saying that he would be very happy to tell about the friendship of their peoples. The chief thought that if he had not managed to talk to this lizard beforehand, then perhaps he would have even bought into all these stories. As he was about to leave, the frog said that he was very glad to meet them. Rakrak suggested that next time they come to the frogs themselves, so as not to bother them with such a long route. Shunan wanted to agree at first, but after thinking about it, he refused the offer, saying that this place was very well suited for their meetings. They said goodbye and the frogs went to their tribe. As he was leaving, Shunan patted the lizard on the shoulder and said something to him, at which time he looked very scared. Rak asked Jel if she noticed it. All this did not at all resemble a relationship of equal species. After returning to his native tribe, Shunen started a serious conversation with the lizard. He hit Owen in the face with great force, after which he asked if he really thought that he wouldn't notice anything at all. He was interested in what Owen had told the chief of the other tribe. The kneeling lizard said that he hadn't told him anything at all. He had simply asked how to shoot a bow correctly, and the lizard had given him a couple of pieces of advice. Another huge humanoid frog began to kick the lizard and asked what kind of stupid excuses he was making, since he himself couldn't shoot a bow. Owen replied that the frog was right, but he lied to Rak so that he would believe all their stories. After thinking for a moment, Shunen said that it was the right decision. The lizard continued, saying that he then pretended that he could not tell more, and made it clear that in order to learn to shoot a bow, one must give something in return to the tribe of frogs. The frog was interested in what decision the chief made after this, and the lizard said that he abandoned this idea, saying that he had absolutely nothing to offer the frog tribe. Shunen praised Owen, calling him a trickster. Pointing to the side, the frog asked the lizard if he remembered that he was on that island. The lizard turned to face the island and fell silent. The frog said that Owen was very lucky, because he was already ready to offer these children for sacrifice. But new victims found them themselves. The lizard said that the frog was right, and he was very lucky. He promised to try to outsmart the lizards of the other tribe. He sat on the shore and thought that if he had known that everything would turn out this way, he would not have even tried to get into this tribe, after which he thought that he should have immediately been wary when the frog so warmly welcomed the lizards, or when they dragged his tribe to the brotherhood ceremony, or at worst when they ordered the lizards to come to this island. The remaining 200 lizards were no match for the 1,500 frogs. Moreover, the frog tribe had a god on its side. This is a two-headed monster that commands frogs. Just like they commanded the lizards, he thought that this would never change. The leader of the black-scaled lizard tribe looked like a strong warrior, and despite the 600 members of the tribe, they were just simple savages who did not know about the existence of bows and arrows. The lizard consoled himself by thinking that if the Rak tribe were sacrificed to the god of frogs, then Owen's tribe would be able to live at least a little longer. He asked his son to be patient and promised that he would soon convince those lizards to come to the frogs. He remembered that the lizards wanted to get their bows in exchange for a buffalo, and I thought that this tribe could be lured into the territory of the frogs under the pretext of getting to know them better. Rak did not waste time in his tribe and tried to learn how to shoot a bow. After another shot, he asked Jalka this time, but she replied that the arrow only reached half the maximum distance. He was upset because he didn't even aim. He thought that this was the limit of their spears and bows, because they exactly repeated the appearance, but they could not repeat the bowstring that the frogs used. Yahello announced that the 5th meeting was about to begin, and it all seemed like the frogs wanted to learn as much as possible about their tribe. Rak guessed that they were hiding something behind this simple trust of theirs, and assumed that they wanted to pull something off. The problem for the lizards was that they still didn't know the frogs' plans and had to remain on guard all the time. He said that it was time for him to achieve at least something at this meeting, and asked Yahello if they had collected the necessary herbs. She replied that the herbalist had found out where they grew, and they had collected everything. Rak was pleased with this and said that it would be good if Owen could become the solution to their problem. Yahello offered to give him a chance to do so. In the frog tribe, the lizard was again beaten by Shunen's henchmen. The lizard begged to let him go and assured that he had done everything as Shunen ordered. However, the frog ordered him to be left behind, worrying that he might die. Owen said the black-scale lizards were a lot more cautious than he thought. The frog asked if they were not at all like his tribe, who jumped into the trap without a second thought, and the lizard said that they were. The frog sighed heavily and threw the lizard aside. After Shunen's henchmen left them alone, the frog told the lizard to hurry, because his father had ordered the sacrificial ceremony to be held as early as possible. He ordered the lizard to find out as much information about that tribe as possible, in order to attract the leader in the tribe to his territory as quickly as possible. But Owen did not understand why such a rush was needed. The lizard thought that only the frogs knew about this, and therefore he needed to listen to them as carefully as possible. Shunen said that the illness of his father and elders was only getting worse, and therefore the sacrifice could not be postponed. The lizard asked if since they were sick, it meant they were infected with garlic disease. Was she really that dangerous? The frog said that the lizard should not know about this, but he thought that it was not a big deal if one of them found out about the disease. He told that scabies is a dangerous disease, and those who become ill with this muck not only begin to itch, They also become covered in white, sticky mucus. And no matter how much you wash off this mucus, it will not go away, and over time it will cover the entire body. And after there is too much of it, breathing problems arise. And the next stage is death. Recently, the priest of this tribe died of scabies. The lizard thought that this was the first time he heard that scabies could be fatal. He didn't understand why Shunen was telling him all this. He assumed that Shunen was testing him, and he shouldn't be either happy or surprised. Owen decided that the lizards must not know about this, because otherwise there would be those among them who would mock the frogs. Shunen agreed with this, but added that they would not be able to hide this information for too long. The lizard said that it was possible to prepare and change the lizard's reaction, for example, by telling the tribe that they could get it too. The frog liked the idea, but he was confused by the fact that the disease did not spread to them. Owen said that there is a grass in the forest that gives off a white color when you break it and even causes itching. When you come into contact with it, he suggested telling everyone that he has contracted this disease, since he comes into contact with frogs more than anyone else. Shunen liked this idea very much. He promised that if Owen could convince the lizard tribe to come to them, his family would be freed from the fate of victims forever. The lizard began to thank the frog for this. Shunen believed that they would need a huge sacrifice this time, and asked the lizard to try to bring the entire tribe. Owen asked to give Rak a couple of bows for negotiations. This time, the lizards brought with them a large number of some kind of skeins to the negotiations. Rakraku said that they contained herbs that could be used to treat scabies. He didn't understand if even this wasn't enough to exchange for a bow. Looking at the amount of herbs collected, Owen realized that they had collected all the herbs in the area. Shunen refused, saying that it was not a matter of their numbers. It's just that exchanging weapons required a certain amount of trust between the tribes. The leader was already tired of this constant talk about trust, and he asked Shunen to fulfill one of his requests in order to strengthen the trust between their tribes. This request involved a one-on-one conversation with Owen. The frog unconditionally agreed to this request because he was sure that the lizard was on his side. Both lizards moved away from the eyes and ears of everyone present. Owen said that before becoming part of the tribe, his gray-brown brothers went through a brotherhood ceremony. Before that, they got to know the frogs better. He asked the chief to tell him about himself and his tribe and promised to try to be as open as possible in response. The lizard asked Rak if he agreed that they needed to put aside their mistrust and take a step towards each other. At that moment, the leader again noticed the very same butterfly that God usually sent to him. He thought that the bug god was trying to warn him about something. She sat right on Owen's head, which surprised him. After asking what kind of butterfly it was, he brushed it off his head. Rak agreed that there was some mistrust between their tribes and suggested putting an end to it. The chief decided to tell the lizard everything about his tribe. Upon returning from the negotiations, the frogs praised Owen. They said that they had finally managed to achieve excellent results. Shunen was amazed that Rak and his tribe agreed to come to their camp on their own and called them idiots. Shunen's henchmen said that when the lizards invited them to their village, he assumed that they had set a trap for them. But it turned out that they were too stupid for that. The frogs now knew the location and size of the village, as well as their knowledge of healing. The scouts reported that there were about 600 individuals in their settlement, but in fact, there were only 300 individuals and no more than 30 warriors. Shunen hadn't expected the lizard tribe to trust them so much, and praised Owen for playing a major role in this. He asked the lizard what he would like to receive as a reward, and he replied that what Shunen had promised him was enough for him. However, the frog asked in surprise what he had promised him. The lizard reminded him that he had promised that his children would never go to sacrifice and that he would be allowed to live with them. The assistant was surprised that Shunen could promise such a thing, and he asked him not to be angry, saying that his father would understand him. He was sure that one cannot always be strict with the lizards. Sometimes one needs to show them that they can live well under the leadership of the frogs. The frog promised Owen that he would remember his promise, and the lizard thanked him in return. After this conversation, he sat on the shore again, watching the island where his children were. He thought that now, finally, as he wanted, he would be able to live with his family. The lizard believed that after this, he simply could not have any problems left. He thought that now all the other problems were the stupid chieftain Rak. This lizard should have been more careful. He remembered how Rak drew some signs on the ground and said that they called them letters, and it was his tribe that invented them. The leader showed different letters and explained their meaning. He also said that you can write several letters next to each other. If you write letters next to each other, they acquire their own meaning. For example, not a lie means the truth. Owen didn't understand why Rack told him about the letters and not the frogs. It was all about trust, the trust that was formed between the tribes of lizards and frogs. It worried the chief much less than the trust that had formed between him and Owen. The chief did not believe at all in the words that the lizards spoke about the frogs. He believed that they all had some kind of secret meaning. His tribe was familiar with pain and knew what it was like to be lost and afraid. He said they were just like Owen and knew suffering firsthand. A tear rolled down the lizard's cheek, and he asked if Rack wanted to tell him anything else. But he said no, because he had already noticed glimmers of faith in them. Owen thought that the chief was very self-confident, but he could not cope with the frogs and their faith. There is no point in talking about defeating a monster to someone who has never even seen a real monster. They didn't even know how to use a bow, let alone a secret frog weapon. He thought it was a stupid decision on Rack's part to tell him about the letters out of the blue. He couldn't trust Owen. The lizard did not understand why the leader believed him. After all, he is a simple deceiver and a cunning man. Shunan told everyone to hurry up as the Blackscale tribe had already arrived. Rack entered the frog village with his people. Shunan and his retinue ran out to meet them, and the leader thanked them for their hospitality. They both said they hoped the meeting would deepen relations between their tribes. Rack asked the owners not to worry about their weapons. They were just afraid that they might encounter a cockatrice on the way. Shunan thought that they wouldn't believe him anyway, if he told them that they wouldn't be able to defeat the cockatrice with these sticks. But when the frogs' feast began, they planned to get their guests drunk and shoot them with poisoned arrows. The chief looked around and, not noticing Owen, asked where he was, and Shunan said that he was preparing for a banquet, after which he loudly called him, saying that the warriors of the black scales had come to them. The frog noticed him drawing something on the ground and assumed that he was deciding where to seat the guests. He asked the guests to come and say hello to Owen, and he himself went to check the readiness of the food. The lizards approached Owen, who said that he had marked their places at the table with letters. After all the lizards have taken their places, the feast will begin. This feast was supposed to mark the beginning of peace and friendship between the two tribes. The leader gave Yura the command to start. The lizard was ready to obey the leader's orders. He threw his spear at one of the warriors of the frog tribe. With one throw, the lizard pierced the frog's head right through. Rack ordered to destroy all the frogs, and the lizards began to kill the frogs one after another. One of them suggested that Owen might have known about the upcoming attack. Rack assumed that they had killed everyone. Ur reported that while they were attacking the warriors, many frogs managed to escape, and Shunen was among them, so most likely they would have to face the shooters in the near future. Although everything went according to plan and the arrows could not stop them. Rack had a request for Owen. Shunan didn't understand why things turned out this way and blamed Owen for everything. He turned to one of his tribe members, asking if he had conveyed his orders to everyone. All the warriors of the village had to attack the lizards, and their lizards must remain in the village until the warriors arrive there. It was necessary to attack the enemy before reinforcements arrived. Shunan ordered everyone to attack when ready. The tips of their arrows were laced with the poison of poisonous frogs. As soon as the lizards touch it, they will immediately experience terrible torment. The leader ordered the warriors to hide behind the metal layers. All the arrows bounced off the shields, not a single one managed to hit him. The frogs did not expect such ingenuity from the lizards. Shunan couldn't believe they had blocked all the arrows. Rack said that these plates could withstand even spears, not to mention arrows, and Ur said that these were very good things. The frog ordered his warriors to continue shooting and not let the enemy get close to them. Everything around was covered in smoke, which confused Shunan. Because of this smoke, the enemy was completely invisible, and the accuracy of their shots became much lower. He was interested in where this smoke could have come from. The frog tribe lizards did not understand why Owen started to set fire to the tree, and he asked them a counter question, asking what else they were going to do with these sticks instead of weapons. They assumed that Mr. Shunan had ordered the village to be burned, but Owen said that it was a warrior from the Blackscale tribe who asked him for a favor. The lizards were indignant that one of them decided to go against the frogs, but he asked to trust him. Owen was sure that the lizards would be able to defeat the frogs. His fellow tribesmen were interested in how they were going to do this, and how the lizards could trust him after he had done this to them. Owen asked them to just trust him. After all, he is a cunning Owen, and even he decided to risk everything he had. Seeing how confident he was, the lizards decided to trust him. They also took sticks and set them on fire, deciding to help their fellow tribesmen. It dawned on Shunan that this was Owen's doing, and he ordered them to retreat, saying that the lizards from the village had also betrayed them. Now the advantage was on their side, and they needed to retreat immediately. But his henchman was worried that in that case, they would finish off the warriors. Shunan thought that he was surrounded by idiots, because if he got into danger, the whole tribe would come to an end. Realizing that they had no other choice, the frogs asked if they would go to Shunan's warrior Boy. Shunan had no doubt in this warrior's fighting skills. However, there was a more reliable and effective way to get rid of these lizards. Meanwhile, on the other side of the village, one of Shunan's henchmen was discussing how Shunan and his warriors were fighting on the southern side of the village. There was a detachment of warriors near the welcoming feast, and they had sent 5 more to scout out the area. He assumed that they were all already dead. Now there were 15 warriors left with Shunan and 4 or 5 on the island. Another 10 were with him, and together with the warriors from the upper part of the village, there were 45 in total. The numerical advantage was still on their side. He ordered the warriors to coat their arrows with poison. The frogs were going to go into battle after Mr. Shunan arrived. The trees shook, and they realized that someone was approaching them. Boy ordered to prepare for shooting. He felt a very strong excitement and did not understand what it was due to. He had exactly the same feeling as when he met the cockatrice. His instincts told him that there was danger ahead. He ordered everyone to shoot. Boy was very surprised to see Jal riding Manun. In these lands, the Manun grew even stronger. The second rider was interested in the question of whether the arrows would hit their beast, but Jal said that he simply ate them, because he eats everything that flies near him. Manun got angry. He had been violent lately. Jael pointed out to the Manun the warriors of the frog tribe and said that there was a whole feast there for him. One of the warriors shouted to Boy that arrows were of no use against this giant, and he replied that he could see it himself. He thought maybe they should shoot at the eyes, but if they wanted the poison to work, they would have to come up with something else. His thoughts were interrupted by Manun, who rushed as if bewitched at the warriors of the frog tribe. Both barely managed to dodge, but his partner was much less lucky. He realized that this monster was no match for the cockatrice. It was much faster, and it was impossible to aim at its eyes, which meant that in order for the poison to work on it, it had to hit it straight in the mouth. After this idea came to his mind, he threw the poisonous frog towards the Manun. As expected, he caught it in his mouth. Boy ordered all the warriors to throw their frogs into his mouth. He believed that the monster could not have protection from poison. Manun caught every single frog. Jael didn't understand what they were doing, and the second rider explained to her that they were throwing frogs from their bags at him. The girl did not understand why they were giving up their weapons. If they wanted to poison the Manun, they should have known that this was a failed plan from the start, because the third blessing of the black-scale lizards is resistance to poisoning. Boy, standing right in front of the monster, realized that his plan was not working. Manun pounced on him and bit off his head, after which he ate the rest of his body. A lot of blood was shed that day, and the entire village of the frog tribe was burned down. However, some frogs were still alive and ready to attack. One of their warriors fired his poisoned arrow. She flew from behind straight into Rakrak's head, but sensing something was wrong, he broke the arrow with one deft swing of his tail. Yer, who had hit the attacking warrior, screamed and called the next one. Apparently, this was the last warrior, and Shunen, abandoning his tribe, simply ran away. But thanks to this, the gray-brown lizards began to attack the frogs, and everything worked out quite well. It was strange that despite all the tribe's problems, their great leader, Alroy, never showed up. Alexander, who was watching this battle, thought that it was his merit. He found a deadly disease that infects the mucous membrane of amphibians. Although it was quite difficult to do, he was still able to find it. Around the time Rakrak decided to leave the Holy Land, hundreds of kilometers away from him, God found this disease, and then he was able to transport her to such a distant lake. This was made possible by countless wasps and other insects. And after that, the strong leader of the humanoid frogs suddenly disappeared. Even an attempt at sacrifice for healing did not help anyone. After the battle on the island, the frogs asked the two-headed god to accept their offerings and show these lizards all the power of God. They asked to destroy all the lizards. Shunan arrived and was surprised that his father had already started the ritual. They believed that victory would definitely be theirs. Covered in soot, Owen ran to Rakrak. The chief praised him for doing a good job, but he did not understand why there was such a rush. Owen tearfully begged them to go to the island in the middle of the lake. After all, on that island there were children of lizards whom the frogs were going to sacrifice to their god. This god could not heal them, but he could start attacking the lizard tribe, and the black-scale warriors might not have enough strength to defeat him. The chief said that Owen should have been told about this earlier, because the frogs had already sailed there in boats, And the lizards would not be able to reach this island now. It was dangerous to swim because once they reached the shore, the lizards would be defenseless against their bows, and they could start shooting while the warriors were still in the water. Owen began to cry, saying that his son was there and that he wanted to be sacrificed. Rak became angry, saying that Owen should have told him about this a long time ago, and then asked why he didn't trust him sooner. He did not believe in the god of these frogs and was sure that the lizards would be able to defeat him on their own. Even if this god appeared before Rak at that moment, he would show him a power capable of defeating even a god. The chieftain asked why the lizard had not told him about this earlier, for the sake of his own child. This could change absolutely everything. If only Rak had known about Shunan's intentions a little earlier. The god of the frogs appeared and they began to praise this two-headed creature. They pointed to the lizard children and asked them to accept their offering. Allroy asked to punish these black lizards for daring to disturb their sacred lake. He asked God to punish them all with his power. Owen, who was watching the island, saw the two-headed creature and realized that it was too late, and he was too late. Rak's Jowl also watched the island with him. They thought that maybe they should try after all, but this time they had no advantage, and absolutely no tricks could help them. There could have been losses in their ranks. Thinking about this, Rak noticed that same butterfly again. He showed it to Owen and asked if he believed in miracles. Instead of a butterfly, a huge insect appeared in front of them. The two-headed frog god was in no hurry to accept their offering. The leader of the frogs did not understand what was going on, because he usually received them with delight. However, turning around, he saw a huge insect heading towards them. These huge creatures were ready to engage in battle. The frogs mistook this insect for a god that the lizards worshipped. This creature that God created looked like a praying mantis. God used a fourth-level minor race and a minimum level of divinity and faith, as well as the essence of abomination. When all these conditions were met, Alexander succeeded in creating the creature. It's likely that very few players have achieved this level of progress at this stage. The two-headed god opened his mouth and rushed at the praying mantis. However, he was able to easily close his mouth with his paw. The frogs ran in different directions and begged for help. The lizard children called their parents, because they were also very scared. Shunan and his father hoped that their god would be able to win soon. The praying mantis addressed the god of frogs, calling him a water serpent who had donned the guise of a deity. He said that he should have realized long ago how insignificant he was. The praying mantis promised to present it to his creator. Having pierced the neck of the frog god with his paw, he promised to help him atone for his sinful stupidity, after which he tore off his head and said that he would atone for his sins with flesh and blood. The two-headed monster was destroyed. Thanks to this, the mantis acquired the ability to exert enormous strength. The lizards were jubilant. They were happy with the victory. The bug god thought that this monster looked incredibly strong, but it was still too far from the creature created by God. He was sure that the weak enemy had failed to reveal his full potential. By destroying the two-headed monster, Alexander managed to obtain the essence of the golden spirit. Alexander thought that he was very lucky and decided to discover a new unknown habitat. God understood the reason why the monster did not use all its power. It was an inhabitant of seawater, and this lake contains fresh water. A habitat in the river would be useful, but they didn't really need it right now. He decided to put this ability aside, since it might come in handy someday. The frogs who swam away from the island could not understand how this could happen to them and their god. Shunan realized that his father was not weakened by scabies. He believed that this happened because of the power of the two-headed monster. Because he was so enchanted by it, from the moment the god appeared, he began to rely on him in everything. All the warriors hid behind God, and Shunan himself became a coward who could not step forward. The entity appeared before its creator and reported that his will had been fulfilled. God thanked the praying mantis for his good work and let him rest until next time. As he left, the mantis said that when the time came, he would again submit to his creator. God thought that everything was finally calm. He wondered whether Rak would stop there. The chief watched as the frogs headed in boats to the upper village and decided that since the island was empty, they could simply swim across the lake. He announced that they must achieve an unconditional victory that day and asked if there was at least one lizard who could lead his warriors to the upper part of the frog village. Owen said that he could go because he still needed to go to the island to see his son. He said that he was not tired yet and would cope with this task. The remaining lizards of Owen's tribe asked the chief to allow them to help his warriors in the battle with the frogs. But he was against it and said that they were not warriors and would not be able to fight with such wounds. But the lizards insisted on their own. One of them said that he had previously been a warrior, and he was sure that not only warriors were capable of killing frogs. They said that after the Rak tribe was able to fight back against their oppressors, everyone was inspired and came to join the battle. This fire had been growing in their hearts ever since they became slaves. The chief said that they were simply upset. They confirmed this and said that they were in despair because of all the friends, children, and grandchildren they had lost, and they really wanted to take revenge for all of this. The chief agreed with them and said that they had every right to be angry. He ordered all who were thirsty for revenge to follow him. Rak remembered how Shunan taught him archery. He said that Rak needed a little more practice to be at the level of the warriors of the Frog tribe. But the chief was outraged. He did not understand why he was not yet at the level of warriors, because he hit right in the center of the target. And he explained that in shooting skill, this is not the most important thing. Rak had strength and accuracy, but he spent too much time aiming. The frog said that it is first necessary to slow down or completely immobilize the victim, and only then finish it off. Rak decided to remember these words of Shunan. Then he promised to teach the chief how to make bows if they would improve relations between their tribes. He said that the materials were very simple and any lizard could get them. Rak didn't understand what kind of unpleasant feeling he experienced that time. Now sailing to the island, he thought that he had to find out about this personally from Shunan. Owen was the first to run out of the water. He was in a hurry. The lizard finally wanted to hug his child. The black-scale tribe lizards watched the family reunion. Rak ordered Yura to send the wounded along with the children on a boat and to go with them himself. Then he needed to move the gray lizards to the lower part of the village in order to cause confusion among the enemies. Yura assumed that they would attack from two sides. But the leader said that only after he had distracted the enemy's attention should he and his warriors swim across the lake and begin the attack. The lizards were confident that everything would go well, because there were now fewer frogs, and they had a new divine blessing. Their black scales were difficult to see in the water under the moonlight. The enemy will come to an end. Seeing the lizards that appeared out of nowhere, the frogs started running in all directions. They did not understand where the enemy came from, and why he was not noticed. While they were thinking, Rak and his warriors began to attack and began to kill the enemy. The frogs begged for help, but they had no chance. The enemy beat everyone without mercy. The leader of the frog tribe was frightened when he saw Rak in front of him, and asked the two-headed god to repay all the sacrifices he had made to him and to save him. However, the chief was not interested in these pleas, and he struck his spear straight into the chest of the frog chief. Having killed him, Rak said that their god was no more. The chief was interested in where Shunan had gone, and he ordered that he be found. A frightened Shunan sat in cover and thought that their warriors were much more numerous. They had poisoned weapons. All the advantages were on their side. Now his father could no longer command the warriors, and the lizards were resistant to poison, meaning that arrows were no obstacle for them. He didn't understand how they should proceed further. Lost in his thoughts, he lost sight of the enemy leader, who snuck up behind him and thus scared him. He hoped that in this hiding place he would be able to remain unnoticed. Rak asked him if he was not a warrior. He said that he would be merciful and allow the enemy to die a warrior's death and ordered them to raise their weapons. But Shunan asked for mercy and asked about their friendship. He said that he did not hold any grudge against the lizard tribe. Rak thought about his words, and Shunan said that they were also threatened by this two-headed monster. He offered to reveal one secret to the leader. The frog promised to tell him how to make a bow, since the chief was interested in these materials. And Rak asked to tell him what they make it from, and he replied that it's from tendons. They take tendons from the back. But the leader was not satisfied with this. He was also interested in whose tendons they used. With a trembling voice, Shunan said that these were the tendons of the lizards. After these words, he realized that his end had come. It seemed to him that he had dug his own grave. Rak only said in response that he understood him. He said that they held no grudge against each other and decided to accept the frog's deal. The chief ordered Shunan to run as far as possible, and he ran as fast as he could and never looked back. Owen asked if the chief would let him escape, and he replied that everything was fine and pulled the bowstring. He aimed at the back of the fleeing Shunan. The chief thought that he simply needed a moving target. Taking aim, he released an arrow that immobilized the enemy. They then used his body as a target, shooting and pulling arrows out of him over and over again. The chief trained very hard in archery. Owen, who came up to him, said that he was now much better at handling the bow and that the arrows were flying in the right direction. Rak noticed that they needed to make the bowstring stronger, as it would break if they pulled it even a little tighter. However, under the current conditions, they could not find better material. And besides, it was time to leave this forest. Winter was approaching, and this area was a habitat for water buffalo, which usually migrate to warmer places in search of food. Rak asked Owen if he had gone hunting again today and received a positive answer. He said they had taken care of the frogs that were wandering around the area, so there shouldn't be any problems with the supply of bow material for a while. The leader was pleased with this news. The chieftain asked if Allroy was Owen's target, but he replied that of course not, because he had been wounded as seriously as his son, and he would become someone's headdress just like his son's bones on the chief's body. Owen's son made a small figurine out of wood. Seeing her, Rak said that this was their keeper. He really liked this little thing. He said that the figurine was beautiful and really well made. Owen's son told him that he wanted to give it to the great chief, but he asked if the boy was sure that he wanted to say goodbye to this thing. But Owen said it was okay, because making and trading items was a fairly popular practice among village children these days. Jiaolu wondered if there were many more such children in the village, to which the boy happily replied that there were many. The boy said that the keeper was the one who saved them, because it is a great and kind creature. Rak said he was sorry he only had one, and Owen suggested they look for more in the village. The leader was ready to pay any price for them or exchange them for anything, but he decided to return to their conversation and asked Owen what he had talked about earlier. The lizard said that in the cave where the frogs were hiding, he discovered something strange. He invited the leader to see it for himself. Owen led Rak to the cave and showed him the entrance, saying that the frogs used it as a shelter, after which he suggested going inside. The lizard said that everyone inside was killed, and Rak noticed there the same butterfly that God usually sent him with some kind of sign. Owen found this too suspicious, but the leader seemed not to hear him. He watched him like a butterfly. He couldn't understand how they could carve something so detailed on such hard stone. Jael noticed that this stone was similar to the one on the beetle's back. God suggested that these might be ancient ruins. There are many types of ancient ruins that can be used to discover wonders or gain knowledge. Among them are items with specific functions, or ruins where you can get demonic items. However, with such a low level of development of civilization, even if the tribe masters ancient knowledge, it will not have much significance. Wonderful ruins can create or change special resources and great mystical blessings. They are fixed in a certain place. They are of great value to Rak as he is a nomad. The chance of a unique relic appearing is very low. God hoped these weren't the ruins of an ancient castle. The entrance above the stairs in this cave lit up. The lizards decided to follow these stairs and see where they would lead them. When they entered, they saw a huge descent down and many stairs, and thought that they would have to go through all of them. Jael asked the chieftain if he was going to pray to God, and he said that he didn't want to bother him with all sorts of trifles. They saw many glowing eyes in front of them and did not understand what it all meant. They assumed that it was all rats. There were a huge number of them. Rak asked why these rats were hissing so loudly, and Jael said that they were not rats, but nutria. She was sure that he had heard of them before. But he was confused by the fact that they were so big and he didn't think that they moved in such groups, and they also seemed angry to him. Owen said that it was the first time he had seen such a thing, and then Rak assumed that they were just some kind of monster rats. He assumed that they were the ones guarding the place and ordered everyone to be on guard. These rats began to attack, and the lizards were forced to defend themselves. The chief ordered them all to be killed because they were strangely aggressive. One of the lizards suggested that they might eat them, and suggested gutting these rats and taking them with them. Joel suggested that perhaps they could raise such animals on their farm in the same way as water buffalo. Owen chuckled and said that if she wanted to do something new on the farm, maybe she should pay attention to the fish. And the girl asked in surprise if the fish didn't just appear and disappear on their own when they wanted to. The lizard told her that they also reproduce by laying eggs. Even the frogs knew this, so they prohibited fishing during the breeding season. He said that in order to breed fish, they would only need to build a dam and keep the fish locked up while they were young, and the lizard promised to think about it carefully upon returning to the village. One of the rats turned out to be alive, and when Ur was about to take it in order to remove the skin, but as soon as he touched it, he felt a sharp and burning pain in his hand. Rak didn't understand how this was possible and decided to check it himself. A devil-possessed nutria could attack its opponent with electricity with a simple touch. God thought that these were the ruins of a demonic castle, and if Rak manages to break through these demonic ruins, then there is a high probability that he will gain demonic power. Mastering magical abilities will not immediately make him a magician, but with each generation the forces will become more powerful, and they will be able to create descendants of sorcerers. But there is one problem. In the Lost World, divinity and magic are in conflict. According to the teachings, magic comes from ancient evil, not from God. Great magicians develop their own powers without relying on the gods. If the number of such people increases, then punishment will follow. It's not that there is no way to prevent it, but that there are many possible ways it could happen. Gradually, the demonic ruins will reveal their true face and will tempt the lizards located there. Rakrak noticed something in front of them that called him a wanderer and asked if he wanted to have such power. It said that if the chief wanted it, it could give it to him. At that moment, Jala approached Rakrak and said that if he was not feeling well, they could leave and return to this place later. He ordered to make sure that all the rats were dead and to check their bows and spears and all other equipment. Looking again at the thing that appeared in front of him, he assumed that only he could see it. He was interested in what it was. It seemed to read his thoughts and said that it was a spirit protecting this place and was visible only to those who possessed great power. The chieftain did not understand what kind of power this spirit was talking about. Then he thought that he could communicate with thoughts, but his deepest feelings were not transmitted. God knew that there was a demonic spirit in front of Rakrak, but he did not understand whether he should warn the chief about it. Having decided to look at the list of the lizard's abilities, the god was surprised to see cunning among them. He did not know when he managed to acquire it. He speculated that Rakrak had developed this ability while fighting Shunen. Alexander found this really interesting and continued to observe the cave where the lizards were located. The spirit continued his story. He said that the force he was talking about was called electricity. With its help, it was possible to burn living beings with a scorching flame, and the ability to emit light similar to the sun appeared. The spirit could give such power to Rakrak. Rakrak thought that if the spirit grants him such power, he will be very grateful to it. However, the spirit said that everything is not so simple, and there are certain conditions for obtaining this power. The leader did not understand anything, because it seemed to him that the spirit had just offered to give the power of electricity to him, and he did not say anything at all about the conditions. But the spirit assured that these conditions were a mere trifle, and that Rakrak's strength would be sufficient to overcome them. The chief was disappointed by this conversation. He believed that if the spirit wanted to make a deal, he should have said so from the very beginning. Rakrak said that if this spirit wanted something from him, he should show an appropriate attitude and be more careful from now on. He asked the spirit to name the conditions he must fulfill to obtain such power. He was interested in what exactly this spirit wanted from him. But if the spirit tried to hide something, then there would be no further conversation between them. Their conversation was interrupted by Joel, who said that all the lizards were ready to move to the village, but he told them to go, saying that he would catch up with them later. After which, the chief returned to the conversation. The spirit informed him that he was locked in these ruins and could not get out. He wanted Rakrak to come down and defeat the guardian who protected the seal, after which the spirit would gain freedom and grant the leader his ability. Rakrak wondered if the spirit was talking about the sparkling power of the monstrous rats lying around. The spirit said that it was not the most accurate description, but it was that very power. He repeated that this ability is called electricity. At the moment, it can only create sparks, however. The more it is used, the more powerful it will become, and it will even be possible to cause a thunderstorm with its help. This ability can be improved and developed, and someday in the future it may even become comparable to divine power. The spirit's ability was so vast that Rakrak could master it, and according to the spirit, not only Rakrak could do this, but another representative of his tribe could also use this power, and if he wants to monopolize it, then it will be necessary to perform a ritual. The leader found this incredible, but he did not understand why a creature with such power was locked in this place. But the spirit explained, saying that this was because his ability was too powerful. Since he could not be defeated, he was trapped in this way. Rakrak was interested in what would happen next, because the spirit had just demonstrated how dangerous he was. The leader was sure that his interlocutor was hiding something from him and suggested that there might be more side effects from using this power than benefit from it. He told this spirit not to lie anymore, because he could go and simply destroy the entrance to this cave, and then no one would ever be able to enter these ruins. The spirit agreed to tell his interlocutor everything and asked the lizard to listen to him. It turns out that he was one of the creatures that once ruled this world. This spirit was descended from a long-forgotten ancient demon. Neither the gods nor he remembered their origin. He was locked here for an unknown amount of time because abilities with unknown origins intoxicate people. Since people do not know the origin of powers, they mistakenly believe that they belong to them. Rakrak thought about what he saw, those whose minds were drugged by power. He suggested that it was a demonic force that was influencing people in this way. The spirit confirmed his suspicions and said that, in addition to all this, his abilities were disorderly. The winners are selected at random. God's power is given to those who are chosen by his judgment, but on the other hand, even those who do not know how to handle power could master it. Rakrak thought that over time, the ability develops, and there will definitely be people who will desecrate the god and rebel against him. But this ability was certainly powerful and desirable. It would definitely be useful in battle. The leader agreed to the spirit's conditions, but he had his own. The spirit was surprised that the lizard wanted to put forward some of his own conditions, but he asked what they were. Firstly, the lizard was interested in the possibility of transmitting the ability only to a few select people due to the random transmission of the ability. The spirit assumed that this could be done, but he did not understand why the leader needed it. He explained that if this gift was given only to the chosen few, it would be perceived as God's choice, and then creatures will stop contradicting God. The second condition was that the spirit also had to begin to believe in their bug god. But the spirit was outraged, because he was a demonic spirit who is older than all modern gods. Rakrak believed that it didn't matter, because what mattered was how he would behave in the future. But the spirit considered this absurd, because the gods do not like demonic spirits. But the leader asked not to judge their god with their prejudices. Rakrak considered the nameless god of beetles to be generous, and this spirit seemed useful to him. The spirit wondered if the god of these lizards would be able to accept him. The leader was sure that if the spirit agreed to the conditions, then everything would be just like that. The spirit confessed that he was not actually locked in these ruins, but simply ruled over them. And these nutrias were simply an attempt to break the leader in order to understand whether he was suitable or not. But he still deceived the lizard, and he wondered if he was angry about it. Rakrak said that he understood everything, and therefore the spirit was forgiven. The chieftain believed that since the spirit lived with these monstrous rats in such a damp and dark place, the lizard should have been more patient. He said that the interlocutor should go outside and see many beautiful places. The spirit asked the lizard's name, and he introduced himself. After this, the demonic spirit reported that the test was passed, and if the nameless god of bugs accepted it, then this ability would belong to Rakrak. Alexander was given the opportunity to possess this spirit and to connect it with the holy, and he decided to take this chance. In this way, he was able to overcome the punishment and gain demonic ability. In his mind, he praised Rakrak, considering that their meeting was a stroke of luck for both of them. So the nameless god of beetles gave Rakrak the ability, and he mastered the power of thunder and lightning. This is how the story of the chosen black lizard looked like. 9 whole years have passed since then. But despite all the history that was told, the man who talked with the black lizard did not understand what relation the nameless god of beetles had to thunderstorms. The lizard asked what color the lightning was, but without waiting for an answer, he said that it was blue. Then he asked what their god's name was. The man grinned and replied that everyone called him the blue bug god, but he still didn't understand why that was so. But the lizard explained to him, saying that he always sent blue butterflies as clues. The man realized that throughout this long story, they had never introduced themselves to each other, and said that his name was Hui. He was interested in the name of his interlocutor, but the lizard said that they would have to end their conversation there. The black lizard thought that uninvited guests had arrived. Hui said that the gnolls had arrived, the so-called hyena people, a warlike savage race with a tribal way of life. The lizard told the man that he had one question for him. He wondered if they were like the people from Salkate. After thinking for a moment, the man said that they were defenseless and poorly armed, and that they also lacked vigilance. To him, they were just wandering gnolls. The lizard liked his reasoning. Taking off his hood, he prepared to shoot. He was also interested in another question. Should they then destroy these hyenas? The hyenas seemed to sense that someone was aiming at them. The arrow hit right next to the leg of one of their tribe. The hyena screamed that it was an enemy attack. The lightning that appeared initially confused them. And then she hit all the gnolls in that place with a good electric shock. Having come to his senses after a good shake, one of them shouted that the lizard had done it. He cursed this lizard but was forced to give the order to retreat. The lizard finally remembered that he had not had time to introduce himself to this man, and said that his name was Owen. Hui couldn't believe he was talking to someone so great. Owen said that he hadn't used his power for a long time and suggested taking a break to talk for a bit. He lit his pipe, and the man thought that these smoking pipes and tobacco were ritual attributes used by selected black lizards to replenish their strength. Owen said that everything was fine, and if the person had any questions for him, he could ask them. Hui didn't understand why a lizard with such power was following someone. He didn't speak of betrayal. He was only interested in why the lizard lived such a hard life, wandering alone in this wild area. Owen said he had a good reason for this. He was full of sins. The lizard told how he once betrayed many of his people. However, he was shown the path to redemption. His goal was to spread the names of the blue insect god and the tribal chieftain Rakraka through stories and writings. This is the path of redemption he chose. Hui thought that even without his stories and writings, there was hardly anyone in this area who had not heard of the tribe of black-scaled lizards. And there was no need to mention Rakrak's reputation as a great priest and leader. Owen interrupted his thoughts by saying that if someone were to attack him, he could easily scare them off, and then asked the man if he was also a wanderer. Hui replied that he too was a wanderer and had come from Automaton. Owen had never heard of this place, so he asked again. The man said that he was heading to the Black-Scale tribe to convey the words of the Automaton Lord. The lizard said that he didn't know that he was a guest, but he was glad about it. Without saying anything, Owen whistled, and a huge bird ran in their direction, and its steps shook everything around. Hui was scared and assumed that a basilisk was approaching them. Owen calmly took the bird by the leash and said that the man was only half right. It was a quokka, or to be more precise, a cross between a basilisk and a chicken. He told the guest to climb onto this wonderful bird. The lizard said that he had not been to the village for a long time and just wanted to visit his comrades. He promised to take the man away, but in return he would have to listen to his story to the end. Already during the movement, Hui asked whether Owen would tell about the blue god of insects or the saga of Rakrak, and he grinned and replied that he would tell a little bit of everything. Meanwhile, in the tribe of the famous leader and priest Rakrak, they moved in their entirety, driving a herd of buffalo. The warriors rode on quarks, and the ordinary inhabitants moved on foot. The chief sat gracefully astride his pet. Over the years, they invented fabric and learned how to sew clothes. Jael approached Rakrak, saying that the elderly stargazer believed that his life was on the line. He thinks that if not now, he will never be able to talk to the tribal leader. The chief ordered the tribe to stop the procession and prepare to spend the night at this place. He asked the worried girl to tell the astrologer that the chief would soon come to him and told him to ask her to keep the lizard alive until that moment. This lizard has always been good at predicting the future, so we need to take care of his funeral. They assumed that this night would be sad. Around the tent sat praying lizards, and inside was a dying elderly astrologer. Upon entering, the leader asked how he was feeling. The doctor who was with him said that he had done everything in his power, but the old man did not have much time left. The stargazer whispered that he was very tired. He said that a lot had happened, and he had had the chance to visit different places and lands and learn a lot. The lizard lost his arm and was exiled, but he was lucky and met the chief of the tribe. He taught many people to contemplate the sky. However, every lizard eventually experiences overwhelming fatigue and exhaustion, and there is only one way to cure this disease. This method consists of falling asleep forever. The stargazer smiled and said that he had decided to be a little extravagant before his last journey and steal time from the busiest person in the tribe. He asked if time was not the most valuable thing, and the chief laughed. He was glad that even in such a situation, this lizard was joking. The astrologer had one question that no one but Rakrak could answer. The leader was all ears and awaiting the question. The lizard was interested in what would happen to them after they died. This question was asked of the first chosen one, the priest closest to the god. What awaited the lizards after death? They say that when everyone dies, they fall asleep, and the astrologer was curious whether they would have nightmares forever. Rakrak replied that unfortunately, he didn't know this information. He was interested in why the lizard decided that he could answer this question, but the old man was sure that it was so, because the blue god of insects saved them when they got lost. So he hoped that he would continue to guide them even after they left the world of the living. Such was his faith. He asked the leader if it differed from God's will, but he said that the astrologer was right and everything would be exactly like that. The blue god guided them whenever they were lost, and he would surely not leave them even after death. Smiling, the old man asked if Rakrak really thought so. The astrologer was interested in how all this would happen and whether they would appear face to face before God. The leader thought and began to fantasize about how all this could be. He imagined a wonderful place where he could run, enjoy himself, and relax. He thought about what the weather would be like in that place, and then added that there must definitely be a clean river there. The astrologer said that he would like to have a house where he could just relax, not a tent that would give the impression that he would soon have to move again, but a solid house where he could settle down. He said that he doesn't like tents. Rakrak thought that this old man had begun to move from place to place, but if he ever found a place where he could calm down while he could breathe, then he would have nothing to complain about. Rak sat with the old man and continued their conversation. The same blue butterfly flew to them, and the lizard asked the astrologer if he could see it. But the old man said that things were starting to go dark before his eyes. The chief said that he had a gift for the astrologer, but he decided that the lizard was just fooling around. Rak indignantly asked if he was really going to refuse his gift again. He promised that this time he would find it very quickly. The chieftain called the astrologer, but it was too late. The butterfly took his soul and carried it to heaven. This beautiful creature brought the old man's soul straight to God. Alexander himself wondered what would happen if he died in a lost world. He made a decision to create an afterlife. The conditions for this peaceful death are not yet clear, but the afterlife is a very important element in the lost world. Even just thinking through the views of the afterlife can increase the chances of winning. The wicked will be condemned to eternal suffering, and the good will go to heaven. This division exists to maintain morality and ethics. Like Valhalla, it can also be used as a training ground for warriors. Subsequently, the souls trained in the afterlife can be sent back to Earth, and all of this can be useful later in the game. Now Alexander had no need to hurry because much was just beginning. He could control the afterlife as he wished. He called this afterlife an ancient meadow. The sun was shining brightly and birds were chirping. After his death, the astrologer found himself in this meadow. He felt as if something was tickling his nose. When he woke up, the lizard did not understand where he was. The thought occurred to him that this was all a wonderful dream. But after thinking a little, he realized that the chief was right, and this was the very meadow he was talking about. There were no stars there, just as there were no stone houses, and the astrologer thought that perhaps he should not have hoped for that. Maybe he didn't need a house or anything like that. He remembered the last words he heard from Rak and thought that this was a really good gift. The lizard sat and enjoyed the moment, humming some melody. Looking around, the stargazer saw that there were other lizards in this place, but none of them have woken up yet. He was glad that there were other lizards in this meadow besides him, but he decided that it would be wrong to wake any of them. The stargazer saw a familiar lizard and thought that this girl had learned arithmetic from him and had been a warrior in life. He remembered how she died when their tribe was attacked by the Goblin Alliance. It was a surprise attack from the United Goblin Tribes. These creatures attacked a place where mostly old people and children lived, who were not sure that they would be able to hold out until help arrived. The astrologer felt helpless. It seemed to him that the end had already come. The goblins mercilessly attacked the defenseless lizards. And at that moment, this girl appeared. She stood up to protect the elderly and children, coming face to face with the enemy. She thanked the astrologer for teaching her to count well and said that it was better to sacrifice one life to save two. Some of the warriors of the black-skinned tribe could disobey even the order of the chieftain if they considered their action necessary. And it was her heroic self-sacrifice that no one expected. The lizard blamed himself for not being able to stop this innocent child. At the funeral of the fallen warriors, the chief was furious. He believed that it was all because of the arithmetic that the old man taught them. He said that all the warriors who knew how to count, having disobeyed the order, rushed to fight the enemy. They all believed that it was better to sacrifice one life in order to save two. The old man then asked him if he really thought that these warriors had done wrong. But the chief was furious that they were all right, and all he could do was get angry. After this, many warriors came to learn to count, and she inspired interest in arithmetic in the warriors. He was glad that they met again, and tears of happiness appeared in his eyes. He wondered if there was anyone in this meadow who had already woken up. He saw someone's tail behind the tree, and he wondered who it could be. The astrologer asked who was there, but did not hear an answer, and the hiding lizard began to run away from him. The old man rushed after him. He asked where that lizard was going. The astrologer ran out to some stone structure and thought that if God was here, then he would really like to find out something from him. He wondered why the blue god of insects chose them. As he climbed the stairs, he considered all the possible reasons. It's probably because lizards are superior to other species, or maybe because God is just good. The astrologer had no answer to any of these questions. Rak considered it all just a lucky coincidence. His thoughts were interrupted when, climbing the stairs, he saw a telescope under a glass dome in front of him. He thought again that the leader was right, and that in the afterlife there were stone buildings and stars. Approaching the telescope, he began to examine it, not understanding what kind of strange thing it was. Still, he decided to look into it. And what was his surprise when he saw what the stars really looked like? He realized that this was the true form of the stars, and everything he knew before was just the tip of the iceberg. The lizard thought that it would be great if he could pass on all this knowledge to the living. The god who was watching him was grateful to him for still worrying about his fellow tribesmen. The afterlife is not only a place where the dead go, but it will also influence the way people think about life after death and the values of those who believe in God. God thought that if warriors entered the afterlife, they would dream of Valhalla. And if immortals with special abilities entered the afterlife, they would dream of a beautiful and peaceful place. And if a scientist gets into this afterlife, it will serve as the basis for technological development. The afterlife was also supposed to function properly, but he was interrupted when he realized that there was a threat in the present tribe. The Broken Ear tribe was already on their way, possessing iron technology superior to that of the lizards. They had even tamed the saber-toothed tiger. The technological skills and movements of this tribe are unusual. Alexander understood that there had to be a player behind them. However, he had prepared a lot for the war with the players. Now he even had an afterlife. Now he needed to prepare to meet the enemy. The players gradually expanded their territories, and in order to keep up with them, Alexander invested a lot in small bugs. He has 3 large swarms of beetles under his control, including a swarm of locusts. It slowly slows down the process for players who are fixated on farming. However, he does this in such a way that no one notices his interference. Alexander also uses them on other carriers of infection, just as he used them on the frog tribe. And finally, he has a nest where all sorts of beetles are raised, which feast on small farm plots. All the defeated lizard tribes joined the Rak tribe. Establishing control over the southern peninsula was now only a matter of time. The main question for him now was how to deal with players who were behaving too provocatively. Meanwhile, Owen arrived at the tribe and brought Hui with him. Immediately upon arrival, Jael told him about the death of the astrologer. He was very sorry that this old lizard had left their ranks. Gyupi said he had heard the name before and assumed it was not the right time to meet the leader, but Owen said it was okay. He said that in their tribe it is not customary to consider the appearance of a stranger at a funeral as something bad. For them, on the contrary, it is rather a good sign. The tribe was at a funeral when the guests arrived. Hui noticed the tribal chief and was surprised to see him shedding tears, and he asked Owen if it was normal for a leader to shed tears like that. The lizard asked a counter question, asking if people don't cry when they are sad. He said that people also cry, but leaders do not do this in public because each of them has their own reputation. Owen said that he knew the meaning of the word reputation and understood that most likely his interlocutor meant that if the warriors noticed the weakness of the leader, they would not follow him, thinking that he was weak. However, he asked the guest not to even try to explain this to the other lizards, because they would not understand him. Because for lizards, there is something much more important than reputation. However, they were not able to finish their conversation, as the chieftain approached them and greeted the lizard. Owen apologized for not being able to say goodbye to the stargazer in time, but Rak assured him that everything was fine. He asked who the man next to Owen was, and the lizard said that he had arrived to carry out an order from Lord Automaton. The man introduced himself, saying that he was Hui from Automaton. The lizard looked at him and said only clearly. Hui looked askance at the leader and did not understand what would happen next. The chief invited the new arrivals to come into the tent. Sitting in the tent, he turned to the man, saying that he was probably tired after a long journey, but they would stay awake all night. He asked Hui to understand their tradition. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a package, saying that he very much hoped that the chief would accept this gift from him. He placed a small bag in front of the chieftain and said that this was a gift for him from their lord Automaton. The lizard emptied the contents into his palm. The gift to the leader was rock salt. Hui said it was something they were very proud of. This was the first rock salt that the lord gave to the lizard for free. Rak assumed that if this was the first, then there would be a second and a third. The man said that there would be more after her and asked to accept this gift. Having said good, Rak clenched his fist and crushed the lord's gift. Hui didn't understand what all this meant, but the chief ordered to tell him to his master that he accepted this gift with joy, and the man tried to understand what the lizard did with this gift. The chief explained that this was one of their rituals, and the man was not familiar with it because he had no god. This ritual is that if you spill a little salt on the floor, God will be happy. He thought that was all that this man needed to know, but Hui didn't believe him. He thought it was just a ridiculous lie. The man insisted that it was a gift from the Lord. But the lizard said that it was just a little rock salt, which he used at his own discretion and therefore did not see any problem in it at all. Hui insisted that the lizard understood that this was not just a gift, because he said that there would be a second and third time, and in large quantities. Rak said that he had heard that Lord Automaton was rich, and it was a little strange that he would send someone with so much salt. The lizard assumed that next time the man would bring more things to exchange, and the man thought that Rak was an experienced lizard. It wasn't that they couldn't communicate because they were of different races. He was a little rude, but not entirely, and expressed his refusal diplomatically. Rak asked if it was time for the guest to go home, after which he added that he spoke like a human, but it was difficult for him to add subtext to his speech, and if something like that was required, he was usually used to solving it with the help of a story. Hui said that he did not have such talents, and if the lizard did not like diplomatic talk, then they should be frank. The lizard should have understood the meaning of this proposal, and therefore the man did not understand the reason for his refusal. First of all, the chief did not like to accept offers that had already been rejected by someone else. He did not like to pick up scraps. If this person has been rejected by someone once, then most likely this offer was terrible. However, the man did not understand what was being discussed and continued to assure the lizard that this offer had come only to him from Lord Automaton. The leader grinned and asked if Hui really believed that he had met Owen completely by chance, and that he had also accidentally offered to accompany him to the tribe's camp. Owen said that this man came from the north, and not from the west as he should have. After all, the automaton is located to the west of their location, but to the north lives the tribe of the broken ear, the Salkate. This means that Hui proposed the same thing to Salkate and was refused. Rak asked the man to tell him why he was being dishonest with him. Ancient relic automaton. Saturn is an ancient relic that cannot be found anywhere else. It is a real fortress with 5-meter-high walls. And the dirty warriors who restore Saturn are also a real miracle. In this fortress, which was built by no one knows who or when, many people from different tribes live. In addition, the automaton had a geographical advantage. The valley in which it was located was the path to the continent. It is in a great location and therefore very protected. It also has a salt mine, which helps the residents with livestock and farming. Rak called Hui the lord of this fortress and said that he did not believe in free gifts, especially if this gift is from someone who hides their identity. Hui stood silently, his eyes downcast. Rak was amazed that the man did not even deny all this and offered to tell how he came to this conclusion. The leader said that the man introduced himself and said that his name was Hui. It was important for him to know what the lizards thought about the automaton, and most likely for this reason he revealed his name in order to see the reaction. It is said that even in the fortress of Automoton, only a few of the 4 families that are loyal to the Lord know his true name and appearance. All who share blood with Lord Hui have the Hui part in their names. And the lizard heard that the Lord had 4 sons and 3 daughters. This man was clearly not a woman, and judging by the wrinkles on his hands, he was not at all young by human standards. This is how Rak managed to determine who this person was. Removing his hood, the Lord said that the lizard was good at his job. He didn't understand how Rak managed to find out, since he wasn't closely acquainted with any of the lizards. The man confessed that he was Lord Automaton and his name was So Hui, but it didn't change anything at all, and he just wanted to give this salt to the Black Scale Chieftain for free. However, Rak was sure that there must be some price for this, since even the greedy Salkoit rejected this offer because of his insight. Rak suggested that if he took the salt, his tribe would have to protect the Lord. They will have to worry and fret about protecting the salt mine, even if the conflict occurs due to the automaton's fault, after which he asked if this was not the Lord's intention. But the man said that this is called diplomacy, and it can also be called a deal. The Lord did not understand why the chieftain refused, if he knew what benefits this deal could bring him. The lizard was sure that the Lord had never heard this answer from anyone else, and he asked why they didn't just capture the automaton. If the lizards throw out the people, then the salt mine and fortress will belong to his tribe. The Lord asked if Rak meant to say that they intended to attack his people, but he replied that he was simply reasoning about what would be best for his people. This diplomacy brings no benefit to his people at all, so capturing the automaton would be their best bet. If his calculations were correct, then even if they had to suffer some losses, they would be able to conquer it. They follow the blue bug god, and if he helps them, the high walls and earthen soldiers will turn to dust. The leader was also interested in whether this man was afraid of being alone among many lizards, but the man was sure that Rak would not kill him. After all, if he dies now, it will be difficult to find a common language with the automaton receiver. The leader was interested in what his successor could do for them. The man asked the lizard if he knew about a game called Go. He talked about how they place white and black stones alternately on intersecting rows, a game where the winner must capture all the enemy stones. But now the rules of the game were not the most important thing. What's important on this board is the main stone. The man knew that the game had already begun. This is a game where two gods play with their tribes as stones, and on this board the lizards and gnolls started their game. And this game is called Autonam, because the lizards are also interested in who will become the successor of Autonam. Recently, the Lord's children began to talk about the teeth of anger and the rest about the blue butterfly. His children began to believe in gods, but the Rak could do nothing about it, and it was less harmful to them than an attack on the automaton. 3 months ago, the gods decided to clash civilizations. The opponent was glad to see Nebula, because they had not seen each other for a long time. However, he did not understand when they managed to become friends, and the second god reminded him of their last virtual game. Alexander was interested in, without trivial stories, why the opponent had requested a chat, but the opponent didn't like that he had called that game trivial. The opponent was sure that this time he would be able to emerge victorious, simply by smearing the nebula. Alexander did not understand why they were arguing. Alexander clarified that there would be no next time, because this was the very last time. But the opponent knew about this and just got a little carried away. In any case, Alexander knew the hegemony's style of play. He appears simple, but he has brutal instincts during conflicts. And he's very good at multitasking. There were many instances where he won because of wars in the beginning. The main character thought that he didn't need to adapt to something that someone else was good at. Hegemony asked Nebula if he really wanted to determine the winner in different ways, and he said that this is exactly how it is. They both needed the same thing. The automaton and his men were at stake. All that remained was to choose the contradictory prophecy. Prophecy is a skill that can be used if you are at divinity level or higher. It's a kind of quest that players give themselves. If the player's prophecy comes true, he gets additional experience points. However, if it fails, the punishment will also be significant. A decrease in experience points due to the religion points spent on the prophecy, and if the player is lucky, he will receive a fine or a negative event will occur. Alexander was interested in what would happen if two players used a prophecy. This is called a contradictory prophecy. One side would receive a reward, and the other would receive a punishment. Such a turn of events would be ideal. They then decided to create a prophecy about who would become the next successor to the automaton. This was the purpose of the contradictory prophecy. Each of them chose one of the Lord's children and placed their bet on him. But before the players made their choice, Hegemony briefly told about all the children of the current Lord. They decided to write down their predictions and then double-check whether they had chosen the same receiver. Hegemony placed his bet on the second child, whose name was Jun Hui. Nebula, however, placed his bet on the fourth daughter, whose name was Kyun Hui. The enemy was surprised. He did not expect such a choice from Alexander. Their choice fell on different family members, and therefore they recorded the creation of a contradictory prophecy.